It is Session Stories. We are back. I got to go back. I'm gonna make us both feel old for a second. So the first time I saw this guy was actually in Dallas, Texas, and I'm trying to figure out if you were at Starplex, the old Starplex, or you were at Trees in Deep Ellum. But I saw Marvelous 3.
I remember playing Trees a few times.
Okay, so I think I may have seen you at Marvelous 3 at Trees. I drove my happy ass down to Trees and saw him, and it was fun because I just got to see him 24-ish, 25 years later, recently in Chicago. So it was a full circle moment to see you guys again. And I this guy...
It was a different era.
Different era is right. For all of us. Some less, some more.
It was black instead of gray back then. So...
But Butch Walker has been part of my musical journey since the time I picked up a guitar, as much as I've talked about the likes of Dan Huff and Mark Diglio and Mike Landau and so many others that have influenced my playing and what I do. And I'm pea-size in the sphere of music, but Butch has transcended. Like, it was funny, the first time I heard Marvelous 3, I'm like, there's a connection here to all these bands that have influenced me along the way, from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And what was cool is I bugged him during the pandemic, and I said, we started talking about Telecasters, and thank God he didn't think I was a complete psycho, and said, well, we can't talk anymore. But we started talking about Telecasters, and I said, you're kind of like my Telecaster guitar hero, though any guitar you picked up, including your amazing set of PRS finishes, have always influenced me. But it was funny. So, and then what I think is cool is for me to be able to talk with you and do this is that not only do you encapsulate 5 different decades of music, not only have you been involved in producing and writing your own stuff and doing your own records and being with Marvelous 3 and being in SouthGang and all these things, but I think what's even cooler is you're one of the best people on the planet. And I've enjoyed talking with you about things that aren't music, and we've talked about everything under the sun from afar. And so now we get to do it on this interview. But Butch Walker, I cannot thank you enough for joining me. That's my intro.
So
I had to get that out of the way.
That's very kind and way too gracious. Thank you.
You bet. How are things? Let's start in the present, and we'll go back to the beginning. But how was this last Marvelous 3 tour? The Chicago show was killer. I want to get into the guitars, and I don't want to bring up too much of the sad memories of guitars you no longer have. But I think it's so cool.
Oh, that's okay. I love all that.
That your PRS, the red, blue, and silver, is still... That's a fun story in itself that we'll get to. But it was cool to see that on stage 25 years later. How was this last tour for you, except for being sick? How was it?
I didn't get to hang out with you, and that pissed me off because I was sick as a dog. I was so bummed because honestly, as Murphy's Law, it's like all year we wait for these Marvelous 3 shows now.
Sure.
Because they're an annual thing, and they only happen one time a year at the same time every year. So all year we're all sitting there trying to get healthy and going, oh my God, nobody can get sick. Nobody get sick. Please don't get sick.
Right.
Especially with COVID and all that. It's like the last thing you want to do is have to cancel because of something like that. And a lot of work goes into it. So of course the day we left for Chicago, that morning, I was sick as a dog because my family had been sick and I'd been avoiding them to not get ill. And of course, everybody got it. Yeah. So I unfortunately was sick with the same bullshit, which was not COVID, but it was like it was a pretty nasty cold chest infection, the whole thing. So it sucked. And I had to, singing with that is just not easy at 55 years old, because those songs are not easy anyway. I wrote those songs in my 20s, sang them in my 20s and early 30s, and now I'm 55, and it's like we don't drop the keys. I certainly don't have my vocals on backing tracks. So it's a chore to hit all those notes, and it's a pride issue. I want to get out there and just still give it like I did then. So the shows were great to without complaining and sounding, like an ass. I'm super grateful. The shows were amazing. No one got hurt. I just wasn't able to hang out with anybody afterwards, which is pretty common when you're really sick. So but it was super fun to do, and the shows were great. They were all, I think most of them were sold out. Looking back on it, and it just was really special to get in the ring with those guys again, who were my best friends since teenagers. You know, we started playing together when I was 16, 17 years old, and we moved to LA together right out of a bumfuck town in Georgia in 1988 to go quote make it, and so years and years later, even after 20 years of not playing music together, 20 plus years, after the Marvelous Three disbanded, to still be good, best friends with those guys, and still keep in touch all that time, and still support each other and love each other like we do. That it just made the show. It makes the shows so much more fun, and it's not about like, oh, we'll get back together because there's a demand, or we'll get back together because there's money in it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's not great money. We put too much money into the show to make good money. Like we go all out with the show. Yeah. We always have, and we always did, and we did this time. And, it's not like we're playing arenas. So like, large clubs, small theaters, it's a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to tour in 2024 too, and to play shows in 2024. So it was never about that. It's just about getting back together because we loved each other, and we thought it would be a good thing to do in light of the debut album, the debut it was a 25-year reunion 2 years ago. So we started it. We started the annual reunion shows then.
I think it's so neat. I just, first of all, I just think what your guys' relationship, I just think is the coolest thing, because as we all get older, it's like, you lose track of people, and so for you guys to still have that going strong.
Yeah, and I mean, you have bitter breakups and shakeups and parting of friendships and all that with throughout the years, bad business, so many reasons, and we've all had that happen, but not with the three of us, not with the core three members. Yeah, and that's just something. There's something looking out for us in the universe that's telling us that it's protecting the three of us from ever falling victim to petty bullshit or greed or bitterness, or you know what I mean? Yeah. No one ever got bitter. We certainly got bitter about the industry and things like that when we broke up, but we didn't get bitter towards each other.
When was the first time you picked up a guitar, and what was your biggest influence? Because the era in which you showed up in Los Angeles, for me being slightly younger than you, but still a kid watching Headbangers Ball and everything else, like for me, that everything from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the guitar heroes from Jimmy to Eddie to Neil Schon to and on and on and on, and then getting into what happened in Los Angeles and really New York in the 1980s, like that's why I picked up a guitar. Was it a band? Did you hear something on the radio? Because we all have that kind of story,
Sure. I was a kid growing up in a small town, Cartersville, Georgia. It was at the time pretty rural, and in the like early 80s, right? So late 70s, early 80s. Late 70s would be when I was 8 years old in 77.
Okay.
And my my friend brought this record to school of a band called Kiss. It was the Love Gun album.
Yes.
And I remember just diving in so deep into the deep end of that band. And then going back and, getting the records previous to that, which there were a few, because they started putting out records in like 73, 74.
Right.
And so I went back and got the first Kiss record. I went back and got like Hotter Than Hell, and I went and got Destroyer and all these other ones. And then a Kiss Alive 1, which was and then Kiss Alive 2, which was around 77 as well. 77, early 77. And as my obsession was there, I was into drums. I wanted to be a drummer. So it was all about Peter Criss, the drummer from Kiss. Yeah. And so I talked my parents into there was a concert coming to town on New Year's Eve, the 30th of December, for first of two nights, Kiss at the Omni in Atlanta Arena, December 30th and 31st. So I was like, I don't care. I don't want anything. My birthday was in November. I don't want anything for my birthday. I don't want anything for Christmas. I just want to go see this band. I want to go see Kiss.
Sure.
So my parents, God love them, got tickets against their wishes and their will for the whole family to go see Kiss in 1977 at the pinnacle of their pompous, pretentious, overblown, like, circus act, right?
Yes.
Like, this was it. This was this was the top before the bottom fell out for a while. So it was the most incredible experience ever. I'll never forget that. That's a core memory. Every little bit of it stands out in my mind as an 8-year-old, walking in and being wafted with the smell of pot for the first time, and it was just a sea haze of weed smoke all over the entire arena because everybody smoked inside, and you could just obviously you could smoke pot inside.
Yeah.
Or they just didn't
give a shit.
They didn't give a shit. Even in the Bible Belt South, and this was in Atlanta, and everyone dressed like Kiss, like went all out, makeup, like the hair, the clothes. I've told this story a bunch, so I'll abbreviate it. But basically, Ace Frehley played his guitar solo during "Shock Me." The guitar on the wire levitates to the ceiling. He's got another guitar on, and he aims up at it, and a pyro device out of the end of a headstock shoots up at it, and poof, sparks go off.
Yes.
Just making it look like he blew his own guitar up. 20,000, whatever it was, 18,000 stoners go mental.
Yeah.
And I'm like forever a changed kid.
Sure.
I'm like forever changed.
Yeah.
So that was like the circus sucked in comparison to that. Nothing they took me to after that was ever going to matter.
Yeah.
So I knew from that day forward I was going to start playing guitar. So that was the mission. And my uncle gave me a guitar that he had laying around that was a K, solid body, electric. I can't remember what it was called, like an 50s airline. They all had, modern names,
Oh, sure.
It wouldn't have been an airline, but it would have been something like that, the Jet Boy, whatever, space age Jetsons bullshit that was popular in the mid-century.
Yeah.
So, and it had it was a small scale. I think it only had 18 frets or something, but it didn't matter. I couldn't play it. I didn't know how to even, plug it in.
Sure.
So had that, and he gave me, in hindsight, the coolest amp ever. I wish I still had, but a Gibson Skylark amp.
Oh my God.
Which I immediately painted silver and, just was, spray painting everything because they were
sure.
I was like, oh, this is so boring looking. Everything looks like too muted and wood tone and
let's paint it.
It looks too conservative and too old people. So the last thing I wanted to do was have that. So painted the guitar, painted the amp, and then, started taking lessons and thank God I didn't as a lefty, thank God I didn't go in and get talked into having a left-handed guitar.
That, what's so funny is there's people that have said this about guitar, and they've said it about things like baseball and golf too. They're like, you know what?
Yeah.
If I could just tell every left-handed person, just go ahead and play right-handed, because that way your dominant hand doesn't get in the way of things. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. Somebody said that to me about guitar. I didn't know you were a lefty that learned right. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's that, but it's also, there's no cool guitars available.
There is not.
I would have never, if I would have known that, cut to now, if I would have known back then where I would be now, I would be bummed that I'm having to search the web for left-handed cool guitars. And also just you can't sit in with anybody. It's a whole thing.
And you can't try anybody's shit.
No, yes, exactly. And I already played right-handed drums, which was already, I had never learned left-handed, thank God, because that would have put it in my mind that I needed to learn guitar left-handed. But anything that you do with two hands, considered to be traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it took both hands to play drums, guitar, bat, golf, anything like that, I just did it traditional, which would be right-handed because it takes both hands.
Sure.
And if you think about it on guitar, your left hand has to have all the dexterity. So it's like I'm left-handed. So why, this, even if I'm just doing this, right. This is a lot easier than this. So I just kind of mentally prepared for that. And I just said that, I'm going to learn normal, traditional way, and never looked back after
That's
that.
Cool.
So I got a teacher who was great. This guy, Chris, who was local in my town of Cartersville, who was he was a prodigy and could play like Alan Holdsworth and and Eddie Van Halen and all this shit he was so good. He was pretty religious guy. So I think his family was probably more into like gospel music and things like that, but this guy obviously had a wild streak and loved rock and roll, and he painted his guitar like Eddie's. He pinstriped his whole life. I think he even had his car pinstriped at one time. Like everything was pinstriped. Yes. And by the way, I didn't know who Van Halen was yet. He enlightened me. Which is ironic because without Gene Simmons and Kiss, there wouldn't have been a Van Halen, or it would have been harder for them to get down the road, right? Because he was like initial backer of the band and and everything. So, but like that being said, I thought that the best musicians in the world were at the time as a 8, 9, 10-year-old would have been Kiss. Yeah, right. And looking back on it, that's kind of like they were like my Limp Bizkit or something. It's like I'm sure when Limp Bizkit came out, little kids were like, "This is the best band on the planet. These guys are amazing. Listen to these guys; they're incredible." And no taking away from them. I mean, right. The drummer was good and all that, and the guitar player's creative. But like, Kiss obviously got known for not being the best fucking musicians in the room, right? Right. Or singers or writers.
What's the story about when Vinnie Vincent joined and Gene Simmons was like, "Yeah, this is not going to work. I don't need somebody that plays with their brain. I need somebody that plays with their dick." And
right, right, yes, exactly. So, but segue that into hearing Van Halen for the first time, and all of a sudden, this is virtuosity at the next level. It's like Alex and Eddie together was like jazz. Yeah. And it was jazz. They grew up on jazz. Their dad was a jazz musician, so of course they played like jazz musicians. Mm-hmm. It was fucking wild, Like I mean, when you listen back to those records, it's so like big band and stabs and like percussive, and those two are just locked at the hip. And David Lee Roth, I mean, what was not to love? If you didn't hate it, you loved it. And so I was like, this is a circus. I don't know what this is, but this is fucking bananas. Yeah. And I thought it was from outer space. I'd never heard anything like that when I heard Eruption. And the timing was perfect. My sister's friend / boyfriend at the time, I had 2 older sisters in Cartersville, and this guy Phil Orton that was one of my sister's friends. He was a few years older. He lived right behind us, and he always had like Blue Oyster Cult posters and Rush posters and all this shit in his rooms and black lights. And I'd go over to his house and hang out because he seemed cool to me, and that seemed very cool. I was interested in this world that he was interested in, and he traded me. I think this is how it goes, but like we traded records back in the day, right? You traded records with people. When you wore a record out, somebody else had one you were interested in, and they were interested in yours. You traded. So just like baseball cards or whatever. And I traded my Love Gun or Kiss Alive 2, one of the two. I think I traded Love Gun for Van Halen 1 to Phil. And I put it on, and I never looked back. I was like, that's it. So after that, it was like pinstripe the amp, pinstripe the guitar. Got to get a new guitar. I need more frets. I've only got 18 frets. That's not going to do it on this little jazz one pickup, neck pickup,
Yes.
like K solid body that's action is this high, and
fingers are just bleeding. It's going under your nails.
I don't know what I'm even doing like on this thing. So I was like, I convinced my family that I needed a real guitar. And my dad being, I'm glad he did this. And my dad being a hardworking blue collar middle class man, coming up in North Georgia mountains, he said, well, you're going to have to go get a job in the neighborhood, and you're going to need to go cut some grass, some people's lawns, and save up some grass cutting money, and and then buy your first real guitar. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess. So I go out and I double down and I work my ass off that summer, and I cut I'm cutting like 5 or 6 people's lawns every week, and I'm saving up my $10 that I would get, like for cutting the grass, right?
Yeah.
And by the end of the summer, I had a little Fender Music Master, which again maybe had 20 frets.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lucky, short scale guitar.
Yep.
Single neck pickup, still not a humbucker, but it was like, it was the only thing obtainable at the music store in Rome, Georgia, at Riverbend Mall, at Ken Stanton Music. In the window, there was that black Music Master, which just was shining, and it was the Wayne's World, oh yes, it will be mine one day moment. And sitting next to a PV backstage plus, backstage 30, backstage whatever it was, amp. Mm-hmm. And it was a combo deal. So I put it on layaway. And at the end of the summer, no more grass to cut. I still was short. I fell short on being able to come up with the money. So my dad kicked in the extra money, which he would have probably done anyway. Mm-hmm. But he made me work for it.
Sure.
And I got that guitar and I got that amp, and I just, I started woodshedding and just learning the craft. And then one, it just, how it grew from there. It was like, oh, now I need to get an Ibanez, and I got an Ibanez. Then I need a Kramer Pacer. Then I need, and so my obsessions kept growing as my playing progressed. And I took lessons from this guy, different guy in Rome, that was very instrumental in my career early on and helping me. His name was Jerry King, and he was a Berkeley grad student, older at the time gentleman, jazz aficionado, played a 335, super skilled and schooled, and was super militant, like it was like the movie with J.K. Simmons, where he would throw fucking cymbals at you and stands.
Yes.
It was like that.
I just watched that the other day. Yeah.
It's great. That was kind of like this guy, except he was so passionate. So when he was proud of you, he would cry. And when he was disappointed in you, he would cry. And it wasn't so much a mental health thing looking back at it. He was just so passionate about music. Yeah. And still is to this day, by the way. We still talk.
Love it.
And he's so proud of me, and I'm forever indebted to him, and I tell him that all the time, because he made me read books on the music industry, and you need to avoid this. I think he saw something in me, and he saw that out of his 70 students that he had at this King Brothers music school that he had in Rome, Georgia, I think he just saw that I could go do something with this, and that I wanted it really bad. I didn't necessarily want the theory. I didn't necessarily want the music reading, the complex charting and the classical and all that he definitely made me dive into. But I think I was faking it big time whenever I would come in and act like I knew how to read music. I was not very good at it. And
I was going to ask, how do you look at the guitar today? Do you look at it because
I was such a good ear player that I think I could figure out what the song was doing, and then I'd sit there in class with him, and be looking at the sheet music and playing it, but like I'm kind of lost looking at it, not really knowing what the notes are.
I'm telling you, I'm gonna do a compilation of all these interviews I've done
that say the same thing.
Well, damn near every one. I mean, if you listen, the only exceptions, and I have not, he's very politely declined doing any interviews, is Michael Landau. But I think with the exception of Mike and a little bit Lukather going begrudgingly. But if I take all like your guitar heroes, my guitar heroes, that era, so 70s, 80s, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the ones that are still alive that I've been able to interview, almost every one of them say, I just couldn't, it was all ear. I tried to learn this. And it's funny because I've always made the big thing of, like, I appreciate great teachers because I think there's sometimes so much information now available on the internet that when kids pick up the guitar, they're like, I got to know every mode and this and this. And it's like, I think they almost get overwhelmed by information overload, and then it makes them just kind of put it down. And I always try to tell them, like, just about every one of your guitar heroes was an ear player. So don't feel like you have to know the entire A to Z musical theory to play.
I applied probably 30% of that knowledge to what I do on a daily basis.
Sure.
And I'm glad that I sort of learned it. I'm glad that I sort of know it. I'm glad I sort of know a little bit of, like, okay, I know a few scales.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody tells me play dominant fucking whatever, play Mixolydian, I don't know what I don't know. Right. I still don't know, even though I was like being able to cover Yngwie Malmsteen songs by the time I was 17.
Yes.
In cover bands.
Yes.
I didn't know what I was playing.
Right.
And it really gave me solace knowing that later in life that Eddie, my biggest hero on guitar, Eddie Van Halen, wasn't really trained. He didn't know what he was doing either.
Yeah.
He had the incredible ear, the wherewithal, the dexterity, and the feel and the passion. Those are things you can't be taught.
No.
You cannot be taught. And I think my teacher knew that about me. I think he knew. He's like, okay, I've got a wild stallion here. I'm not going to be able to reel this guy in. I can't get him to sit correctly with the guitar, which he would like do like this. I would play like this. You gotta
be up like this.
Yeah, and I'd be like this. And he'd also see me perform, because I would perform these concerts with like little cover bands and things like that, and he would see me play these shows and put on a show, and he would be like, oh, this guy's he's probably more of a performer than he is a virtuoso on guitar. So anyway, he cut me loose and was like, with what I've taught you, you could probably teach guitar lessons to beginners. And that lit a fire under my ass. So I ended up taking in about, probably about 10 students a week.
And how old were you when you were taking in students?
16, 17.
Wow.
So
love this.
I was, because there was a music store that opened up finally in my podunk town that there was no music store in. We had to go to Atlanta to, buy guitars, to the cooler record stores, to, if you wanted to get any real music gear, whatever. But a little music shop opened up called Strings and Things, and the guy that ran it, Ashley Schubert, I think he had come from the used car sales world. So he was very charming and very good at sales.
Mm-hmm.
And he was my dad and him took a liking to each other. They loved to drink together. And they loved hanging out and getting in trouble together.
Yes.
And this bond that happened because I literally walked in off the street one day to the music store and said, hey, do you want somebody to teach guitar lessons here? And he goes, well, can you play? And I picked up a guitar and ripped, and he was like, you're hired immediately. And so in the back built a room. And
wow.
And after school every day, which I got out of school early, my last 2 years of high school, I got out of school at noon because I opted out of college prep or anything like that, and I opted out of AP so that I could do what was called a DCT, Diversified Co-op Training Program, which means you get out of school at noon to go work a real job, and you have to literally, perform well at your job and and clock in and clock out a certain amount of hours a week, or you would fail the class at school. And the teacher would go by and check up on you and all this stuff. So Ashley was great to me because he took me in and we became buddies, and he became buddies with my dad. So like, this was like, he was my ally because I was also playing clubs 6 nights a week in Atlanta and Rome, back and forth, at night.
Love it.
Sometimes going to school, teaching guitar lessons after school, immediately driving to sound check and playing 2 sets of covers a night in bar bands, and getting home at 2:30 in the morning to go to sleep and get up and do it all over again. And I did this every night. I did this every day.
Wow.
And so some days I couldn't even like come into teaching. I had to go home and pass out after school because I knew I had a gig that night. And so my poor, Ashley, that poor guy, I had to like cancel lessons constantly, reschedule them with people. And, but he covered for me always. Like when my DCT teacher would come by and check up on me, who was a real asshole, Mr. Pinkard. Pinkard. I mean, only that name, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say that tracks.
It's like a villain from it's like a villain from the Ferris Bueller. And he would come by and check up on me, and I would be home sleeping, and Ashley would shoo him off and be like, "You can't bother him. He's in the back teaching a lesson."
I love people like this.
And he just was that was like that was like a knight in shining armor to me,
yes,
to be
man.
that, to have my back and believe in me, because nobody believes in you that you're going to go make it doing music when you're from rural Cartersville, Georgia, and nobody in that town shares that dream with you at all, and nobody encourages that dream either. Hardly parents would ever even do that. The biggest supporters I had was, the music store owner, my mom and dad, and maybe a couple of other teachers that secretly knew what I was doing after school at night, playing clubs, and were like, "Oh my God, this kid, he's like burning the candle at both ends. That's more than I can say for me." Maybe they were thinking that. They're like, "Holy shit, this means a lot to this guy. Yeah. He's not just like signing up for being on the football team and whatever." So I had a few believers in little Cartersville, Georgia, that really helped make a difference in me feeling like I was doing the right thing and not a villain. Because it, honestly, in that town at that time, it was like, it's the Bible Belt. So it was like, if you weren't playing religious music, you were, going to hell and a heathen and whatever. So it's like, playing hard rock, heavy metal and wanting to actually do all the things that would make you go to hell. I was excited about all that. I wanted to, experience what was the promised land that Circus and Hit Parader and Cream magazine showed me every day. Yep. When I bought those magazines, and there wasn't MTV till 1980, but once that came along, it was like, obviously that was a whole new world of visuals put to the music, and I was like, fuck, this is great. I have to do this. So there was no looking back, really. I haven't let you ask many questions.
No, this is perfect because you're going right where I want to go. I was just going to say, so I'm assuming playing these clubs, you must have somewhere along the way run into a Mr. Jace Fincher and Slug Mitchell, and there was one more member of SouthGang. And I guess, how did SouthGang form, and then how did you end up in Los Angeles in 1988?
So, with King Brothers Music, Jerry King, my old teacher that I mentioned in Rome, it's all because of him that I met Slug, and I met Jimmy, which would become Jesse, who would have been the singer from SouthGang eventually. We all met because we were all students of King Brothers Music.
Oh, wow.
And, because they had a drum teacher, they had bass, guitar. So Jimmy was a guitar player, quite good too for his age. We were the same age. When I got up there, I realized I wasn't alone, because Rome was bigger than Cartersville and there was more fish in the water. And I finally realized shit, there's kids my age, not just cops in their 30s playing music like it was in Cartersville. So,
isn't it fun when you discover that there's other musicians around? You're like, oh shit, you're here too.
Yeah, I would walk into lessons and people coming out and going in would be ripping.
Yeah,
they'd be ripping and I'd be like, holy shit, you're like my age. Where have you been all my life? So we bonded over that because all these kids were also all into metal, because metal was what guitar was all about then at that point.
Absolutely.
It was jazz or metal, right? And or alternative, which would have been like new wave at the time and things like that. So I met Jimmy because he was into Motley Crue like I was, and Ozzy and Priest and Dokken and Iron Maiden and Van Halen. Obviously Kiss was all of our first loves. And I met Doug Slug. I met Slug, the drummer, because he took lessons there as well. And he was a metalhead. So we were all three metalheads, and they already played in a band together. And so I was in a band with dudes from the Atlanta area because I lived further south, closer to Atlanta. And I had to go to the Atlanta area to find people to play music with that were considerably older than me, or a few years older, because I was still in high school, obviously. And so I'm trying to remember when I finally I ditched that band, and Slug and Jimmy ditched their band, and we formed a band called Bite the Bullet. So, because, well, okay, I got to back up a little bit. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Slug and I started a band first together.
Okay,
and our band was called Bad Boys with 2 D's and a Z.
Love it.
And we were in a band with two older guys in their 20s already, who were like in their mid-20s, Chuck and Drew. And so it was, we basically had a band that would play. That was the band that was playing 6 nights a week doing covers in Atlanta and in Rome every night. Because those guys, the two older guys, had the resources to go play these places. Because they were already playing clubs like bar bands and cover band circuit. So this was our in, Slug and I.
Sure.
So we did that with them as long as we could. And then Jimmy had a band before that with Slug called Oasis. and so when Slug left Oasis to join Bad Boys with 2 D's and a Z, and we played for a while, Jimmy had a band called Roulette with some other players around Rome. And we just finally realized that we were friends. We'd always hang out together. It was cordial. Competitive, but battle of the bands mentality bullshit, but cordial.
Yeah.
We realized that there was greener pastures, and I was like, Slug, I'm still in high school, but once I'm out of high school, I'm going to LA. Do you want to go to LA with me? And he was like, absolutely. And Jimmy wanted to quit his band and had the same dream. So he joined, I think him and the bass player from Roulette, Brian Kirtland, they joined us. It's foggy, but this is what I kind of remember. And we started our band and we called it Bite the Bullet with a Y. So Bite with a Y. And we ended up playing around a little bit just to save money. And we played those same clubs that we were playing as Bad Boys. And we saved up a little money, and we basically, it was time to move to Los Angeles the minute I graduated high school. So I graduated high school the next day we left. And we moved to Hollywood. And that was the beginning of all of it. I was the guitar player. Jimmy was the singer, I should add. I wasn't the singer yet. I was not really a lead singer yet. So so we went out there, and Brian Kirtland, our bass player, lasted only like maybe a couple of months, and he just realized LA was not for him. He didn't really want to do this. And so cordially, the funny thing is Jace Fincher, who is, the bassist from SouthGang, Marvelous 3, everything we've ever done, and my best friend to this day. We met while Bad Boys was playing, when Slug and I were playing with the two older guys, because we would rehearse at this place called the Fraternal Order Policeman's Lodge, which was the FOP building in Rome. And the cops let us rehearse there as long as we backed up the chief of police for the Christmas ball every year doing Elvis covers. And
I love this. This is awesome.
We were called Kenneth. His name was Kenneth Kynes. So we were Kenneth Kynes and the Four Skins. I'm not making that up. And we would play the Christmas ball every year for the policeman's ball, right? And he was the chief of police. And the shit that we got away with in that town because of doing this and befriending this guy and getting to play, we would just basically throw rock concerts at the fucking FOP, Fraternal Order of Policemen's Lodge. Because
I love this.
We had mattresses down in the basement, like that we would like crash there. We would bring, girls back from the bars that we were too underage to even get into and still go. It was wild, man.
That's
it was
so
wild.
Cool.
all this while I'm waking up and going to high school.
Yeah.
Which high school was so boring to me, obviously.
Oh, in comparison.
Yeah. I couldn't wait to get out of high school because this was just like, holy shit. I'm already living way beyond my rock and roll dreams.
Sure.
And expectations than I ever thought I would get to because Cartersville was so fucking boring growing up there. It was so boring, and you didn't have the internet to escape. You didn't have you had an Atari and MTV, and your friends in the neighborhood, and that's it. You cruise the McDonald's parking lot in your car on weekends. Yeah. So I was like, I want more than this. So I was getting more than that, a little more than I bargained for sometimes. But anyway, we would do these. We would throw these, like, basically our rehearsals were like concerts, people would bring beer, weed, but it was awesome because, we never got tickets.
What a time.
We never got speeding tickets. We never got pulled over. And they always had our back. And we would play clubs in Rome and in Atlanta. And then Jace, I got sidetracked, sorry. Jace Fincher was in a band called Tickled Pink, which was already touring. He was... he had 4 or 5 years on me and Slug. So he was already out doing it, but he was like a local rock star to us. This guy he was beautiful and had like luscious pink hair, like blonde and pink. His band was called Tickled Pink. And he wore like pink spandex and like ripped up t-shirts and fishnet and all the things, makeup. Beautiful. And I'm like, this guy's from Rome, Georgia? Like, how is this possible? And the only way you knew that is when he opened his mouth, because he'd be like, hey, man, I hear what y'all doing. He still talks like that. He's so Southern. And basically, he came by with his band one day to watch us rehearse. And I remember him walking in and being like all cocky and like, oh, man, I came by to see this like 16-year-old wonder kid on guitar play and see what this is all about, And they had like girls in tow. It was like a scene out of like a goofy movie, like Rockstar the movie or something.
Yes.
It was such a scene like that. So of course, and I'm back there like this, behind my microphone, just like this, I'm like, I don't want to like this guy. And of course, so I rip it up and I go nuts. And I'm like, I think we played Bark at the Moon for him.
Yes.
And I fucking ripped it. No whammy on my 78 silver anniversary Strat. I would bend the neck like Jakey Lee and like, and so they were blown away that I could do any of that shit. Right.
Right.
And so anyway, Jace, with all of that said, after that, I found him to be the most charming person in the world. And he made up for what like I lacked, which was social skills, because I spent all my time woodshedding at home. I was the only boy in my family, very kind of a loner. Didn't learn the people skills right away. But I can say every bit of my people skills I've learned in life have been from my father and Jace Fincher. And Jace was just so lovable, like from the minute you met him, or hateable if you were jealous of him. Which I was. And so, but then I just grew to immediately love him. And I was like, I love this guy. And so we would hang out, and like whenever he'd be in town or something. And we were like, God, I wish we were in a band together. This sucks. Because we're moving to LA
Yeah.
And our bass player's already committed and everything. And then 2 months later, our bass player says he's throwing in the towel and going home. And I called on the landline in our 1-bedroom, non-air conditioned apartment with 6 dudes off of Hollywood Boulevard. And I go, Jace, do you want to come be in our band? And he's like, I'll be there in a week. And so he gets in his van with his girlfriend and drives cross country and quits his band and joins. And we were joined at the hip ever since.
Wow.
Since then. From like 88 to now.
What was it like out there in 88? Because by that point, it was a on the street, even differently than like 85. You know what I mean? It's an on the street party and everyone is fighting to make it. And what was that like the second you got out there? Were you like, okay, now we got to come up with a strategy? Like, what was that like day one, week one, month one, all that good stuff?
Well, the beauty of going out there in 1988 is there was no way to find out how hard it was going to be. There was no way to know. Mm-hmm. You just had to go. You were blissfully ignorant, mm-hmm. and you were just oblivious to like how impossible and hard it would be to do, because there was no internet to mm-hmm. research. There was no way to know.
Right.
My girlfriend at the time, it's funny because at this point I was dating a dancer, which sounds so stupid and cliche. But she was a dancer from Rome, Georgia. And she was older. She already lived in Atlanta. She was dancing in Atlanta. She got a job. She got an offer to go dance at this place called the Tropicana, legendary mm-hmm. place mm-hmm. in LA. Mm-hmm. So she moves out there. Like, she moves out there 6 months before, maybe 6 months to a year before we do. And she's out there, and the only way to really talk to anybody is on a landline, right? Back then. So I would just talk to her on the phone and ask her, what's it like? What are bands up to? She would literally mail me in the mail bands flyers. And I would get all these flyers for like Warrant, mm-hmm. all these bands that were on the Sunset Strip at the time that were still local bands. Mm-hmm. Tough. Mm-hmm. She would send me flyers of all the like most popular bands on the Sunset Strip. And it was these flyers they would make up, and it was like you would have to go out to this block on the Sunset Strip that had 3 very legendary clubs within a block of each other, with the Whiskey, the Roxy, and Gazzarri's. Mm-hmm. And you flyered out there every night because it looked like heavy metal Mardi Gras. It was heavy metal Mardi Gras. It was just a sea of hair and hairspray and leather jackets and tight pants, and everybody, and it was as many girls as it was guys. Yeah, because it was basically one big meeting. It was one big Tinder app, you know, like right. Just that was everybody there trying to hook up with the other. It was guys trying to charm literally the pants off of every girl by making them buy tickets to their band's show coming up at the Whiskey, Roxy, or Gazzarri's, or the Troubadour, because their band's better than the last band that gave you a flyer 5 seconds ago. And it was competitive as hell, and you had to get out on the strip and you had to sell tickets because it was this thing called pay to play, mm-hmm. that the strip was doing a racket where the promoters were running a complete racket where they would have 4 bands a night. They would have a band play at 8, 9, 10, and 11. The headliner was at 10, a cleanup slot at 11. And if you were not the headliner, you were responsible for selling 100 tickets, X amount of tickets. Basically, enough tickets to sell the room out is what you had to do. You had to sell all of your tickets at X amount of dollars, $8 a piece, $10 a piece, whatever you sold them for. It doesn't matter. You could give them away. But at soundcheck, if you didn't have the money for the X amount of tickets that you were allotted to sell, you didn't play. And you had to pay to play. You had to pay them at soundcheck and then say thank you very much, and then set up and play your opening slot or your support slot or the cleanup slot after the headliner. So we did this. We did this for a year straight. We went out there. A lot of bands have been doing it for way more than a year straight out there trying to get signed. But we were, to be honest, we were really good at what we did. For all intents and purposes, hair metal was not known as having the best talent in the best bands and the best songwriters or the best singers. What they were known for were having ripping guitar players.
Yeah.
And if your musicianship was great and your singer was great and your singer was good looking and your band was good looking, that's a bonus. And if you had a cool name and you wore cool clothes and you could draw girls, that's pretty much what it is. It's no different when emo hit. It was the same thing.
Sure, like absolutely.
20 years later, it was different haircut. Same thing. But like,
well, isn't it funny how it always repeats itself eventually?
Oh yeah, totally. But that's what the way this was and how it worked out there. And so we got our foot in the door by playing some venues. We played clubs. We played opening for these bands, Tough, opened for all these other bands on the
I was
strip.
going to ask, were there any bands that you're like, hey man, we're in the trenches together out here? Was there any bands you guys were?
Sure. That band in particular, Tough was still in the trenches, but I mean, they were popular. Because they had the visual package way down.
Yeah.
And we were coming out there at what would be soon be the tail end of the hair metal genre. Coming to a close.
So let me say, I want to say this, and you guys are included in this, and I've said this for years. I said, everyone, you and I've seen a lot of your interviews, I've done them, like we've seen a million documentaries. Everybody can tell the story of, oh yeah, and I want to hear your perspective, because I love the inside perspective of one day it was just over. And you're out on tour, and they give you, I mean, everybody I've talked to, it's like, no, we were out, and they called us, and they're like, this is it. That's it. What I find funny, though, or I should say maybe sad, is that the musicianship, in my opinion, in terms of guys being really good, Jace Fincher being a good bass player, Dana Strum and Slaughter being a really good bass player, not just a good guitar. You had really good musicians, Rachel Bolan and Skid Row, like guys that are not just guitar players. The bands were getting better. In fact, I think it's not like anything in music. I always believe it's like, once we really perfect it, we're tired of it. It's like, well, no, we're not. We got it. We're good in it. We got it. We nailed this. It didn't, it wasn't quite as this. And yes, some of this was overdone, but like, and I always said it was kind of like you had Shotgun Messiah. You had a lot of bands that didn't get their heyday with unbelievable musicians in the band, but it was like, no. This is over now, and so I just wanted to say, I totally hear you, but I almost, when I think of SouthGang and Skid Row and even LA Guns to a certain degree, kind of that latter half, and I think of some of those, it's like, wait a minute, like, there were some really good fucking musicians going, like, there were some guys but that was over, and now we had to switch, and it was like, God, sometimes it makes me sad, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's sad, but at the same time, if you're not realistic,
right,
coming up about thinking that people are not going to move on from one thing to the next, then you're just you're blind and you're living with your head in the sand.
Yeah.
And at that time, my head was anything but in the sand. I was a fucking sponge. I was sponging up everything. We'd moved. You got to figure. I went from a deprivating small town of Cartersville, Georgia, of not knowing shit, to being dumped down to Hollywood Boulevard and seeing new religions, new sounds, new bands, new fashion, new clothes, everything. It was so stimulating and so overwhelming and beautiful that I almost didn't care about what kind of band I was in anymore, because I was like, I don't care, because I'm going to do this no matter what. Going forward.
Love it.
It's not over for me if this music is over.
Sure.
It's not over for me. And looking at it, we saw that writing on the wall in real time while making our record, because that's a big story, obviously, in that tail end of that genre when everybody was seeing Teen Spirit, on MTV and going, uh-oh, whatever.
I think what here, I want to top on two things that I didn't mean to interrupt, but there's two things that I found really interesting that you've said before that I'd love to dig into. One is that even though you were on the tail end, you, not knowing you were going to end up being a producer one day, got to work with Desmond Child. And I thought that, talk about another moment. It's like stars aligning, and look at, like, you never know where you're going to end up. And it's like, wow. And there was so much. And then I thought the second thing that was so interesting you said one time was when grunge started, there was a little bit of, well, I'm not going to go chase the next thing that the record labels are going to just try to saturate again. And of course, for those of us that are old enough, grunge didn't last as long as people think. Like, it was, in terms of the popular sphere, like, it was kind of quick. So I always thought, wow, well, that's really interesting foresight you had at the time of going, I just got done being on the tail end of something that, you know, you guys tried to do, and now you don't want to do it anymore. I'm not going to just go jump into that now. Those were two things I found so interesting about the time you spent, because, yeah, and so you could look at it glass half full or glass half empty.
And let me also put a disclaimer in here that I didn't want to jump ship on that genre just because it was dead.
Right.
I didn't jump ship because it's like, you know, oh, it's not cool to be in that anymore. My heart was not in it anymore.
Right.
And honestly, it burned out way before that, because I should say that that a band was responsible for that, and that's when we were signed. So SouthGang, we were Bite the Bullet. We got signed. We had to change our name. We changed it to SouthGang. We got signed by a Virgin Records subsidiary called Charisma Records, and the first two bands they signed was us and this band called Jellyfish. And we went to see Jellyfish play their record release show at the Roxy. Jace and I did. We went. And I remember taking my dad. My dad was in town, who had never been to LA. And we're watching this band, and Jace and I both were looking at each other going like, we fucking suck. Why are we doing what we're doing? This is incredible. And it was like, and they weren't doing what was considered glam or hair metal. It was glammy looking, but it was way weird 60s psychedelic clothing and hair. But the songs were like, it was Pet Sounds. It was Beatles and the Beach Boys and Queen. And all four of them sang, and all four of them sang like 4-part harmony, perfect. And it was Jason Faulkner on guitar, who would go on and still to this day be Beck's band leader, and Roger Manning Jr. on keyboards and vocals, who would go on to still be in Beck's band to this day. And both of those guys, good friends of mine. And Roger Manning has played on many of my records since.
So cool.
And so, you know, to our first time seeing this in 1990, and we're still like barely 21 years old, and I'm having my head torn off right now. Like, certainly didn't see the grunge thing showing its head yet, but seeing that band Jellyfish and going, this is what we could be. This is what a band can be when you don't have these limitations on your sound, your guitar sound, your drum sound, your singer, and is like, and lyrics and all that, like, where it was just like every song's about baby, you know, it's like and whatever. There's some fun songs like that, but like, let's face it, the ones that were the biggest songs from that era are songs like Living on a Prayer, that tell a story about being down and out in a small town and shit like that. So that leads me to Desmond Child, which I said we've got to work with Desmond Child if we're going to stand out above the rest. And so Desmond actually agreed to executive produce and co-write our debut album in SouthGang. And
so cool.
Yeah, and it was boot camp. I hated it, but I loved it because I learned so much from him on how to be and how to write, and it was a master class because I'd never written a real song yet. You know, we knew when we got signed we weren't strong songwriters yet, but bands weren't getting signed based on their songs for that genre. You know, I was a hotshot guitar player. Our singer was cute, and he had a high voice and sounded good, and we were a cute band. And we had a following, and they were like, if we put them with the right producer and maybe some co-writers, boom. Well, it didn't boom, but what did happen was it forged my path, knowing I need to take songwriting way more seriously than I do being in a hair metal band. And I need to take songwriting more seriously than I do even my guitar playing. Because, you know, at that point, I was such a I was a skilled guitar player enough to be like, well, unless I want to go the route of trying to be on the cover of Guitar Player magazine every month and do clinics and be like an Yngwie or a Steve Vai, which were idols of mine back then, I really need to diversify my program here. And so that all of those things were perfect storms that did that. Seeing Jellyfish, writing with Desmond Child, getting set up with this massive record expectation and a $400,000 video budget for the first video and $350,000 budget for the album, which was less than the video for some reason and took 3 months to make, but the video only took 1 day to make. And it's like all this was like all this was riding on it, and it just crashed and burned because of the timing.
Wow.
And that was my ticket out. I was like, oh, if we would have been successful, I don't think I would be here talking to you today. Maybe I would, but I don't know if it would have given me the career path and the longevity that I've had up to now. Because sadly, like you said, so many good musicians. Yep. Now, I'm not saying the ones you name checked haven't had a great sustaining career.
No,
like Rachel Bolan and all these guys have done well. They've been able to stay the course and be kick-ass. But I think a band like us that didn't even get a look, if we would have been slightly successful in the face of grunge, it would have been, we would have been considered not serious musicians or artists or songwriters. And that part makes me sad, because you're right. There was some amazing, I'll be the first to go out on a limb and say it right now that I think Janie Lane from Warrant was one of the most incredible songwriters and wrote incredible songs and was so talented and a great singer and a great frontman. And I watched the music business tear him limb from limb till there was nothing left of him but a fucking carcass of dependency and addiction and sadness and loneliness. And that broke my heart in two. Yeah. Like, that made me so sad. And I've seen those guys. Eric Turner's a friend of mine and was my friend since way back then. And they've been able to stay out and still tour and do it and stay yes. Stay active doing that, and for the love of the music, and that music should be celebrated because it's great. And so I'm always happy that bands are from that era are still out doing it. It makes me happy that they're doing it. It makes me so proud and so happy. It just wasn't my time. Yeah. In 88, 90, 91, it wasn't my time.
I couldn't believe I just got done watching the Nothing But a Good Time one on Amazon Prime.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
I think what blew me away, and part of the reason I started this channel was, I'll cover something by Warren D. Martini, and I'll have an 18-year-old reach out on YouTube and go, I didn't even know this existed. Then they go down a rabbit hole like you and I went down a rabbit hole about Hendrix.
Yeah, don't underestimate the kids. They're all about it now. There's shredders everywhere that are like under 21.
Yeah, and it's like it's like if somebody opened a door and said, now, I know you didn't know this was out here, but here's 20 years of music. And they're going, what the hell is this? And then,
they're too young for even emo.
Oh my God, 100%. Like think about it, they're born in 2004. It's like, wait a minute.
And by the way, I look back on it and go, not a bad thing to be inspired by virtuosity.
No, not at all.
To be inspired by these guitar players that could fucking rip and do things that seemed inhuman. Yes. And to me, that's huge. I'm not going to shit on other genres after that, but emo was not known for its prowess. No. It was a lyrical game. It was like how hard, how brutal can it be, or whatever, or just good, crafty pop songwriting, to be honest. Sure. Like Fall Out Boy and things like that, and smart lyrics. But it was not based on, as a matter of fact, it would have been downplayed to be like unless you were like Avenged Sevenfold or whatever.
And when I was thinking about talking to you today, I was like, man, I really want to bring this up because I just have all days to read this, but I was reading, I'll forget his name, but producing Chappell Roan and Olivia Rodrigo. And he said, what's funny is he's in his 40s. He's like,
he's great, that guy.
Yeah, he's like, I have a bias towards a guitar solo, because he goes, I listen to Metallica. Metallica has guitar solos. I don't think about producing them and giving them a guitar solo. They, as the young generation, tell me they want the guitar solo. And he goes, I realized right then and there, it is no longer about my perception of what I used to think was cool or is cool or isn't anymore. And it's like when I talked to Dan Huff and, he's producing Kane Brown and he's like, do a solo for me. And he goes, I did something very tasteful. And Kane Brown goes, no.
No, rip it, dude.
Do the stuff that you used to do with Giant and everything. Like, do that stuff. Before we get the transition to the SouthGang to what was next, did you have a favorite? And I want to geek out about guitars with you whenever we get a chance. But like, did you have a favorite shred guitar from that era that you're like, oh shit, that one played beautifully? Because I had a couple of Charvels that I really wish I still had, but I didn't know. Do you have any from the SouthGang era that you're like, man, I really wish I still had that one?
So when I moved to LA, obviously Charvel and Jackson was still king.
Yeah,
that was like big. It was Charvel, Jackson, and BC Rich, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they were starting to like, everybody was starting to play like the Gunslinger BC Riches because of all the neon paint jobs and bullet holes in them and shit like that.
Yeah.
And I was always fascinated with every time I ever played an actual real Charvel, like pre-pro Charvel or whatever you want to call those. The ones that were like, before they went to like the Model 5 and the Model 6 and whatever those were.
Yeah, those import ones. Yeah.
Yeah, those were fine, but like I just remember really loving those early ones that it was unobtainable. I couldn't afford one then, and certainly I can't even afford one now. Like an 80s Charvel is like fucking $8,000 or something. It's so dumb.
I know.
It's like yeah, and I'm looking at them all the time on Reverb, like nostalgically, like, oh, look at this. This is cool. Look, it's got a Japanese flag on it. I want it.
Yeah.
And then it's like they'll want like $8,000 or something. And I'm like, nah, I don't want it that bad. But I think what I had that I was playing when I moved to LA, I was playing Ibanez. I was playing like an Ibanez RG550 and an RG560.
Yeah.
Which was sort of like the utilitarian version of the Gem.
Yeah.
Didn't want the Gem because it was too spot on. Didn't need the monkey grip. Didn't need any of that.
Right.
And those were fast and they stayed in tune. They had the patent pin, the knockoff Floyds on them.
Yeah.
And
what they call those? The Ibanez Edge or something?
Oh, the Edge. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd gone through a phase of like OG Floyds because I had them on. I had several Kramer Pacers when I was still in Atlanta, when I was still in Georgia.
Yeah.
And I loved those little guitars. Those were cool guitars. And then when I got the Ibanez's, they worked great. And they were well made for being on a budget. I think you could pick one up for $600 or something like that back in the day.
Yeah.
And then I think I tried a couple of things when I moved to LA. And then when we got signed, I tried a couple of things, that was like, okay, I remember I had a Carvin for a minute.
I always wanted a damn Carvin, and I never got one.
Oh yeah, but what really what got me was like, the first thing you did when your band got signed was like, oh, endorsements. I can get like free guitars possibly. So what can I get? What company can I get that will maybe advertise me and stuff like that? And Tim Kelly, the late Tim Kelly from Slaughter, was a good friend and a sweet human. He had played in a band called New Haven, and I used to do my day job was doing phone research for this company in Hollywood that I used to work the day job out there. And he worked there, and his singer was the boss, interestingly. And then he got the gig in Slaughter, and he got a Robin endorsement.
Oh, yeah.
So he hooked me up with Robin, and Robin was great to me. And I was using those guitars, and they were making me like all kinds of cool custom guitars, like with custom, fun graphics and stuff on them. And I was really into their Tele style model they had. And so for the first, for recording the first SouthGang album and the touring, I used Robins, which were great guitars. They were kind of a Texas version of a Charvel Jackson,
Yep. Yep.
And trying to think of what else after that. They did some print ads and stuff, which was cool. You always wanted that when you're a kid. You're like, oh,
sure.
Look, I'm in Guitar Player magazine.
Yes.
And those were cool. So I kind of wish I still had those. And then the second album, I was playing Les Pauls and Strats. I went back to basics because it was the time.
Yeah,
grunge was big. More classic rock sounds and tones and guitar styles, drum kits, everything. So Fender, I didn't have an endorsement with Gibson. I just had a couple of old like 1979 and 1980 Les Paul customs that I really loved. Yeah, which I actually have a 1983 Les Paul Standard over in the corner right there. That Fender was making some really dope, shred friendly guitars that were like, they're kind of super strats, hard like HSS strats, and putting Floyds on them if you wanted it and that kind of thing. And like, so I actually had an American Standard, I think it was, and it was like a Jeff Beck. I want to say it was almost like a Jeff Beck model they made and sent me. That was purple. It was beautiful. Had lace sensors. Had a HSS lace sensor set up in it. Yeah. And that guitar sounded and played great. I loved that thing, and I used that like crazy on tour. That was my main guitar besides a 3-bolt 74 3 single coil Strat, stock Strat. That was a hardtail. Those were my two main guitars on tour that I was using at the time for the second and last album we did. Those were pretty shreddable. Those guitars, they were really fun. Yeah. I didn't use the Les Pauls live as much because they were just beasts,
Oh, sure.
I did love them though, and I recorded with them. And then from there, I mean, it just gets more ridiculous, from there, like the guitar journey.
Speaking of journey, keep going chronologically. So post SouthGang, did it happen the way we talked about? Was it like you guys were out there and then there's like the record company call and it's like, hey, this is over. Thanks so much. Unless you want to start buying flannel, we're done here.
We already bought the flannel on the second record. The second record, we were wearing flannel and combat boots and cosplaying as like with beards.
Sure. Yeah.
Stupid. It was dumb, but everybody was kind of desperate to like, that was like doing it to fit in, and that was doing it because the pretty boy image was done, all that, which was fine. We didn't really care about that anymore anyway. But we were just going along for the ride. We were going along with the times. But the music, we made a darker record, of course. This is all checks all the boxes. So that the last record was very much, it was heavier, it was darker, more minor key songs, less major key songs. Mm-hmm. It was produced not great, didn't sound good. I didn't think it sounded good at all. Had some great guitar solos on it. I fucking busted my ass on guitar on that record, though. I remember. It was recorded digitally when the first things that were out that were digital, which were terrible.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So like the producer, which was a legend, Keith Olsen, who we signed up for because he did the big, at the time he had, he was riding high again he was a huge producer in the 70s, Fleetwood Mac, Foreigner, all these big bands, Rick Springfield, all those big records, Stevie Nicks, but he he was riding high off of the Whitesnake '87 album, the self-titled, which was fucking amazing, by the way.
Oh yeah,
I mean that's John Sykes and Coverdale at his best, and it was a cool record. Keith had just bought into like the digital like revolution that was not revolutionized yet. Or evolutionized yet. And so it was like a digital console that was cold as a fridge sounding, and then a digital recorder that sounded terrible. And so he recorded all of this on digital, and it was like, oh my God, this sounds flat and lifeless. And it was mixed in-house, so it wasn't able to be saved in the mix either, I don't think. So anyway, whatever, I'm not bagging on it. It was a good experience. It taught me to care about sound,
I just keep hearing about your journey, whether it's Desmond Child, whether it's you may not have known what was coming, but it's so interesting, these things that you're hearing, and it's like mental note, learn that. I always say sometimes in life you learn what you don't even expect going into a situation that you may not even like, but you take something from it. Totally. And it ends up coming out down the road. Like the first digital thing of being there for that probably just gave you, it's like getting another degree. You know what I mean? It's
it was like, oh, well, this medium is not ready yet. And even still though, it was like, it did pave the way going forward, because I started my own studios, like my own like home recording setups, and was on reel-to-reel analog tape. I had an 8-track Tascam 38 and a Yamaha board, and I just used the Yamaha board, for the mic preamps and for mixing on it and everything. And it was a very bare bones setup with like cheap, shitty EV mics and whatever used mics I could find, and not knowing how to record or mic up a drum kit, knowing nothing about phase or anything like that. Just having no compressors, no nothing. Just trying to figure out how to make stuff sound good with just that was challenging. But I learned a lot, and I recorded, and sometimes there would be magic that would happen, with those recordings.
So you do the second SouthGang record, and then what? I guess because I know you've talked about this before, and so I hate to always ask you stuff that it's like, well, but I'm a huge fan, so I've heard a lot of your interviews, but I always like to share this, and I don't want to leave anything out for those that haven't, but what was the in-between time? In between leading up to Marvelous 3 and post-SouthGang? Like, what were those years like? What were you up to? What were you thinking about doing, I guess, at that moment?
I was recording. I was learning how to record, because I had just come out of making 2 back-to-back records with SouthGang that were learning experiences, I'll just put it that way, of what to do and what not to do. And it was great, because it taught me a lot, except for nobody was really teaching me or letting me in to teach me the actual ropes of recording. Like, it was sort of forbidden back then, like, to want to do the producer's job as an artist. I think that there was some intimidation and that kind of thing. I mean, it's fine. It's like, it just was, I certainly wasn't ready yet to do that. But I asked all the time, I was, oh, what does this do? What does that button do? What does that fader do? What is that? Why are you plugged into that? How does this work? So I was just inquisitive all the time about it. And I always,
why do you think people were shut down about that? Like,
I don't mean to disrespect any of the guys I worked with, the producers. I just think that there might have been, back then, it was like a sacred job. I mean, I don't want to say that every kid with a laptop now can produce a final master that can, sound like a record, but it's a lot easier to do that now. You can cut a lot of steps. Back then, it was a 10,000 hour situation of coming up in recording studios and learning how to mic things and phase correlation and, signal chain and signal flow and all these things that really mattered, and also performance. And, so there was a skill set that came with these producers usually that was like, they had to be a lot more talented than even a lot of the artists And so I was infatuated with that because my favorites growing up, I was always infatuated with Trevor Horn, and I was infatuated with Prince and, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and all these people that were artists, but they were kind of better than just artists. They were Brian Eno, they were like these people that could literally do the Todd Rundgren. They could do the job on stage, and then they could go in the studio and even better make the records. And I was infatuated.
It's one of the reasons I read liner notes as a kid, and I fell in love with session guitarists.
Same.
Because, them going in, I always told people, not only did they not get enough credit, but if you look at a guy like Mike Landau or Dan Huff or Steve Lukather or Paul Jackson Jr., or even John McCurry, who was doubling as Cyndi Lauper's guitarist and then playing on a Michael Bolton or a Cher record.
Yeah.
What I loved about it was they're not just like, here's your part, here's your guitar, play it. It's, I'm creating a part that did not exist before I walked in here. Meaning, it's like and there were so many producers that I loved. And I think it's one of the reasons I'm such a huge fan of your work, having seen all this stuff is because that to me was, I was always the kid growing up. I didn't want to be on stage. I wanted to be a session player. I wanted to be in a studio. I just want to be a studio rat all day and hang out. And because it's like, well, you're actually helping make this music. You know what I mean? It's there's a whole group of people that, I think about like the Thriller album and all that went into that. And it's just
Quincy
like,
Jones.
Yeah, like, and having, them put that together when they wanted to get Eddie Van Halen solo timed up with Mike's, and all they had was the vocal track and his solo, and they had to go re-record Beat It again. And it's like, I just, that to me, and so I guess I understand your love of it, because it goes back to when I was a kid opening up a vinyl or opening up a booklet and going, who played this and who was producing this and whose song wrote this. And I'm sorry to nerd out about it, but that's,
no, I love that. And so in the 90s, I guess this would just be all through the 90s, because after SouthGang ended in early 90s, like 92, I didn't have $1 to my name. I didn't have any gear, didn't have anything. All I had was that Tascam 38 half-inch reel-to-reel and a cheap Yamaha 12-channel board. And I basically just started making records in wherever I could work. In my parents' garage, anywhere I could do it, I just did it. And, I did like, I started making and obviously our own records for my own bands, which would have been, we were called the Floyd's Funk Revival at the time, and then the Floyds, and that was me and Slug and Jace, and this girl Christina that was one of the singers, and this guy Bradford on keys. And I learned like a lot of just from trial and error and mistakes, and was like, but it always sounded decent enough because I knew the song going in. I knew how to at least make sure we're going to execute the song well. I don't know if this is the best kick drum or snare drum sound in the world, or drum sound overall. I don't know if these guitar sounds are that great. I don't have the ability. I don't have like good mics and preamps and stuff. I think I was using like a SansAmp Direct box for guitars at the time, and bass, and recording everything one at a time. Yeah. Some stuff I was even using Drum Machine. Some stuff I was using drum pads to play to. So I just really just put my head down and started learning and buying recording gear magazines and learning tips and tricks and all this stuff. And it just became really my life journey, because I felt like I had a handle on the performing and band thing, which we were on autopilot, off and running, playing 200 shows a year on the road. And whenever I wasn't on the road, I was home making records for people and making demos for people. Wow. And then digital came out, like with a affordable digital, not like the digital we used with Keith Olsen back in the day, but ADAT machines by Alesis. And you could pick one up for relatively cheap. So I sold my Tascam half-inch and bought an ADAT, and then eventually was able to save up and buy a second ADAT and lock them together and have 16 tracks of ADAT, which was digital tapes on an actual VHS recording tape, like you would put in a VCR, right? and it recorded digital information on it. I recently picked up an Alesis ADAT over there because I was was trying to see if I could find some old tapes in my mom's attic of like the old Floyd stuff, so I could archive it. I literally bought it for $50.
Unbelievable.
I think it was probably $5,000 new or $3,000 new. I don't know, but like I bought it for $50. That's digital ages like a bad actor. Like it's like not pretty. The pricing. I bought that, and at the time that was so revolutionary because you could get clean recordings and you could bounce tracks down to other tracks without any signal degradation. Even though the signal was pretty degraded from the get-go because the converters in those machines sucked.
Right.
And so like, but still, like when you if you bounced 7 tracks down to 1 for vocals and stuff like that, that was big because you could do it without getting any noise or hiss or whatever, tape hiss and all that. Anyway, I learned how to record on that and still had that same Yamaha board, and I ended up doing I did the demos that got this band called Crawl Space their record deal, which they had to change their name when they got signed, so they changed it to Seven Dust. And that was the record. They basically redid the exact same record that I did in my parents' garage.
What year was that when you did that?
Well, that would have been mid-90s, I guess.
Wow.
That would have been mid-90s. So probably 94, 95. I might be wrong, but it's somewhere around the mid-90s.
Wow.
Because after that, I'm saying the timeline because I'm basing it on the equipment I had. I had the 2 ADATs, and then I started reading up on this thing that was really revolutionary called Pro Tools. And Pro Tools was it was still new. It was called Sound Tools at the time. And then when it changed,
I had that original demo. I just remember that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And then it changed its name to Pro Tools. And the first version of it was only 16 available tracks. Mm-hmm. So you had 16 recordable voices that you could do. And I thought, well, that's cool. I've got 16 tracks of ADAT. What's the difference? Sure. Except for this, I can do a computer and I can actually see the waveform on a screen and I can actually manipulate it and edit it, chop it, copy it, paste it, do all this stuff that seemed incredible. And records at that time were being made on Pro Tools. This was starting to become an industry standard. And I was starting to see it as tape's going to get phased out. And I was like, this is the future of recording, and I need to learn this. But it was unobtainable financially. And I literally was at the brokest of my life at this point. I was living in a friend's guest house apartment that was in the backyard of my doctor's house, because my doctor's daughter was my friend. And I lived in the guest house, and I had my little recording set up there. And when it was time to, when I discovered this used Pro Tools rig that was at the local music store at Atlanta Discount Music, and my buddy Jerry, who was a great drummer, worked there, and he was a Pro Tools whiz already. He understood hard disk recording and DAWs and everything, and I've never even had a computer, so I didn't even know. I didn't have the internet. I didn't even have a computer. I didn't even know how to turn on a computer. So he called me and said, "Hey, there's this used Pro Tools rig up here. Somebody upgraded to a new TDM version, which is unlimited tracks, and it was 24-bit. So there was a 16 or whatever bit version or something like that of this original 16-bit, 16 voice, 16 channel version of Pro Tools with a used computer, because it was on an old operating system and an old operating firmware computer that was specific to that. So if you bought this rig, that computer was only good for that version, and that version of Pro Tools would only work on that computer, nothing newer. And this was the beginning of the pain we all have today. Of everything getting phased out by companies, and and being proprietary, right?
Yep.
So, but this was to my advantage because the system's value was greatly reduced because this was a phased out Pro Tools system. So it was still going to be like $4,000 or something like that to get the computer, which was already an archaic computer, the Pro Tools software loaded on it, the interface, which is a dedicated proprietary Pro Tools interface, which was 8 in, 8 out. I think that's all it was. But I knew that I could do this, and I knew I could make magic with this system if I had it. And I didn't have $4 to my name. So my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, was a bartender. And she basically said, I'm going to buy that Pro Tools rig for you. Wow. And I was with my bartending money, and I was like, no, you are not. I was like, you are fucking not. I was very pride bent and like, very much I'm going to do everything myself and I'm going to make it on my own. I'm not going to take a handout from anybody. And she insisted, and I buckled and I took it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to pay you back one day. I promise I'll pay you back. I promise I'll pay you back, Wow. And I got that rig home, and I stayed up 24 hours a day with the book, the manual, learning it, trial and error, recording, failing, errors, calling Jerry every 5 seconds. What is this error code? What is this error code? What does this mean? What's DAE mean? What is DAE error? And I'm like freaking out. Like, I don't understand any of this, but I'm learning it as I go. I'm in the van with the band, still doing a couple hundred shows a year. I'm in the van when I'm not driving. I'm in the passenger seat reading the manuals, reading everything. I go home. I stay up all night every night, and I record a record. I recorded a record on it, and it was what would be the Marvelous 3 album that would be the one that kind of springboarded everything for me. And so I recorded it all. I had a 2-channel mic pre by Rolls. It was a Rolls 2-channel mic preamp that I bought that was $200. And an Audio-Technica 4033 microphone, which was probably also about a $300 microphone. And that was all I had to make the entire album.
Unbelievable.
The drums I did at a studio in the midnight hours when I could go to a studio and record off hours. And we recorded all the drums to the record and dumped it down immediately right there to a 2-track DAT tape, a digital audio tape. And I would have to borrow a DAT player because I didn't even have a DAT player. I didn't have the money to have a DAT machine. And I would take the DAT machine over, and I would digitally run out of the DAT machine digitally and into Pro Tools, and I would record the drums in digitally in real time, bounce all the drums out, and all the drums were only on 2 tracks because we had to submix them right there at that recording studio at midnight on the spot, hoping everything was loud enough that it was going to stand out once it got guitar, bass and vocals and everything else on it. And I just put the drums into every song in a different session in Pro Tools, and then started layering and just went to town. Guitars, bass, vocals. Flying vocals around for the first time ever, being able to do that. I think my hard drive was, I don't even want to get this wrong. I think my hard drive was 500 megabytes.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's all I had was 500 megabytes. That was huge. That was big.
The day that they said they were going to do a gigabyte hard drive.
That was the future.
And so I grew up on the somewhat the opposite side. My uncle was doing here in Nebraska was taking radio stations digital for the first time. So they were coming off carts and decks and automating them. And so you had uncompressed waves was the only way to get really high end stuff that you could play over the air before that got compressed down. And I remember he was like, well, the problem is there's not enough storage. And I remember he goes, but one day they'll get up to a gigabyte. And of course, now it's like we got cards that are as big as my fingernail that are, a terabyte. And it's like, yeah. So
yeah, no, my hard drive was this big.
Oh, yeah.
It was a 2-space rack mount 500 megabyte hard drive. And because the Pro Tools sessions were recorded at 16-bit, 44.1, K.
Yep.
The files weren't that big, but what I could not do and didn't have the hard drive space to do was to record non-destructively, which means I couldn't just record takes and takes and takes and archive those takes and pick from takes. I had to treat it like a tape machine and record in what was called destructive mode, which meant when you hit record and record over something, it records over whatever it is, and that is your only file. So it's literally when you get done with a 16-track session, which is all I had was 16 tracks, and it was a 3-minute song. It was 16 files, 3 minutes long, each one being maybe, I don't know, megabyte or whatever, 2 megabytes, 3 megabytes, and because back then, like if you had like an MP3, it would be like 5 megabytes, and if you had like a WAV file, it would be like 50 megabytes.
Right, which is just like catastrophically big.
Right,
yeah.
so we're recording in WAV files, obviously, at the time still. So like, it's even like taxing my 500 megabyte hard drive just to do an entire album. I think I had to like delete some stuff that I knew I wasn't going to use just to be able to like finish an entire album on a hard drive. Because I couldn't afford to get anything more than that anyway. That was just what came with the system. The system was like from a R&B group in Atlanta that was a one-hit wonder called Silk, and they offloaded that system to the music store and upgraded to a new one, and I got that one. And I remember when I got it back, I had to wipe the hard drive because the hard drive, I needed every bit of space on it, and it was full of like Silk backing vocals. So it would be like it was full of like R&B background vocals, and so I had to completely erase and format the hard drive just before every record so I could have enough room. But I did that record, and I did it all on that Pro Tools rig, and it had the song "Freak of the Week" on it. That I took it, I mixed it down inside the computer and burned it off onto a CD-ROM.
Oh, yeah.
Because the computer I had luckily had a CD burner built into it. So I could burn it down.
Which at that time was like, you know.
Right. Yeah, you downloaded a copy of Toast, and you used this software called Toast.
Oh my God, I forgot about Toast.
To burn down to a CD-ROM, and you could put it in order. And you could have it. You could actually have you could pick the space between the amount of seconds between the songs. So it was exciting.
Oh yes.
You could make it almost like a master.
You could.
And so I took it into the local radio station at 99X in Atlanta, and that story I've told a million times. But that's basically, I played them my little record that I made, and they heard "Freak of the Week," and after the first chorus, they stopped it and said, "That song's a hit. We want to start playing it on the radio." And I was like, well, it's kind of not mixed yet. I was like, I just did it in a computer. The drums are on 2 tracks. They didn't know what I was talking about. They didn't care. They were radio people. They weren't like engineers.
Sure.
So
right.
They're like, it sounds great to us. What's wrong with it? And at that point, I started seeing the light bulb go off in my head. I'm like, oh, I can make records that compete on my own. I can make a record and even mix it in my bedroom, and these people don't even know the fucking difference between it being done in a $2,000 a day studio with a mixer that's going to get points on my record and charge $30,000 to do, and right. It's like so it was revolutionary, and it was cool, and that started the path. And of course we got signed to a big deal, and the song was a hit. And I got a huge publishing deal from that, and I paid my girlfriend back.
That is an unbelievable kind of story. Cool. Was it? Okay, I want to back up for just a second because I got a couple things I want to hone in on. Who was it that convinced you, hey, but you should sing?
That was the guys in the band. That was Not the singer, of course, but the singer, we were like on the outs kind of already at this point in SouthGang. We went to China. We toured China. It was at the tail end. We knew the end was coming. We knew the end of the genre was coming. And we had this opportunity to go play for what we thought was a lot of money and lots of exposure, playing all over China. And being one of the first American rock bands to ever tour China, which I think we actually were. And it was like through this travel agency thing and our management at the time, which was a bullshit management company. And the label was like, yes, please get them out of our hair. They drive us crazy, you know? And so we went to China for like 6 weeks, 5 weeks, a long time. It was awful. It was awful because everything that could go wrong went wrong. It's a whole other podcast to talk about that. But it was definitely eye-opening. And at that point, on these 36-hour train rides between these tiny towns we were playing, we were plotting the demise of the band and the next thing. And so me and Jace specifically were train car mates, and we were best buddies. And so we would sit there and go like, hey, let's go back to the States and end this. Let's find a new band. Let's get a new band together. Let's get a new singer. Let's blah, blah, blah. And that's when Jace and Slug were both like, I don't know, man. I think you should sing. Because I was at that point, I was singing all the harmonies, singing practically, at sound checks. Because our singer, when he couldn't sing at sound check, I would do sound checks. And we would play gigs on the side, just bar gigs for fun, and play covers on, under a different name. And I would sing. It would just be us as a 3-piece. And we loved it. We had more fun doing it than the band. The band wasn't fun anymore. So when I was like, I can't be the singer, they were like, yeah, you can be the singer. And so I just, after a couple of failed attempts of trying to find a singer that would do it with a band that was freshly dropped and had no record deal and had nothing, and why would a singer want to come into that? I just took over. Wow. And I was already kind of the main writer by that point anyway, and getting a handle on writing songs and trying to hone that craft more. And so that's when I became the singer / guitar player.
I think it's so cool. I love what I miss is breaking as a band off a radio single. I don't know if you've heard this story before, but I thought it was so fascinating that I was trying to talk with Steve DeMarchi from Alias, and about they were, doing that whole the more than words can say, but people forget they were in Sheriff. And they forget that the lead singer of Alias and the guitarist of Alias were in Sheriff, and they have a hit song that everybody think was a late 80s hit song. But what it really was is they were trying to make it as Sheriff and never could really break out. They formed a new band, and they're in the studio recording the Alias album. And of course, the manager calls them and is like, hey, you got a hit record. Like, how? We're recording the record right now. They go, no, from Sheriff. Some guy in Vegas on a radio station found that song. He's like, well, this is a cool song. Threw it on the air, and it blew up. And when I hear your Freak of the Week story, and I hear that story, what I think I miss is before the whole, I can get off on the old man route rant of the Telecommunications Act in 96, and everybody could converge, and you lost program directors and all that good stuff. But it's like you were kind of that, I feel like you were the last ones in that door of, hey, we could break this on radio and get it out the door. And now I don't feel like that's as, and better than I if there's even an inkling of that anymore, but it doesn't feel that way. And so it's like I love to hear stories like that, because it feels like, oh, yeah, that was back in the day. That was the cool stuff, Those are the moments.
We couldn't get arrested, and we just played clubs and bars, and if it wasn't for that program director at 99X at that radio station in Atlanta that was a modern rock alternative station, and her name Leslie Fram, who is so valuable to me as a friend and a human, because without her taking a chance on a band that was literally spoiled meat. Like nobody wanted to touch us, like no labels, that we had gotten passed on by everyone. No one got it. And then she was like, well, that song's a hit and y'all are cool. and I'm going to play it. And then I think you're going to see that those people that passed on you are going to offer you a lot of money
and they
to
did.
sign with them. And they did. Yeah.
You got the last laugh. Were you going to simultaneously, did you feel like your producing career was going one way and then you're like on this rocket ship of Marvelous 3, or did Marvelous 3 kind of have to get to the tail end before? Because was it SR-71? Was that one of the first ones, if I remember correctly? Okay.
Yeah. I didn't even think I was going to be a producer. I didn't think that I would, outside of doing my own bands and stuff, that was just a necessity because we didn't have the money to go into real studios with real producers back in the day.
Sure.
Without a record deal or whatever. And so I did it out of necessity, and I knew I would always want to make my own music and my own records and be like a Prince, like that was my aspiration, or a Todd Rundgren or something like that. But the thing is at that point, I'm like feeding my ego generously at this point, because there's a lot happening at once. We've got a top 5 hit at radio, a video at MTV. We're doing all the late night appearances. It's moving very fast, and this is what I've always wanted my entire life. We're getting on tours. We're playing big festivals. So it's like, okay, I'm in it. This is my moment. So the last thing I thought of was like, oh, I'm going to just like stop everything and be a producer. I didn't even think that was even an option. I just thought, I was obliviously thinking that naive and thinking that I was going to be forever a famous rock star or whatever, I was always going to be a popular frontman, and that, you definitely start, believing your own hype and everything at that point in your career. And I think what happened is I got a call from this guy, Andy Martin, who had helped out the Marvelous 3 and the band before that by putting out some independent records of ours through his little record company called Deep South out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And he was managing this band from North Carolina, or from the Baltimore area, called, what were they called? Radio Star.
Okay.
And they were newly signed, and they sounded suspiciously like Marvelous 3. Not that we were like inventing the wheel, but still we were kind of doing a thing that was 5 years. It was 5 years early and 15 years too late.
I only want it. Well, hold on though, but I want to give you some massive credit. So this is going to be a kiss ass moment, but it's all genuine. What's funny is I found, how you get older and you start to think to yourself, you're like, why do I? These are music geek things, but it's like, why? What is it about this group of artists or bands or singers or songwriters? Like, what is it? Like, why do I keep gravitating? Because it's not like it all falls in line. It's not like it's all metal or it's all 80s pop rock ballads. It's not like it's all. But there's always a similar vein, like what's in your ear. It's usually a melody, or it's harmonies, or it's a mix of these certain things. And what I think was interesting is that I always tell people I was at a weird age in that when I started listening to music in my mom's car, you're talking about at home by myself, I've got hard rock. So I've got everything that is happening in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, when I'm 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I'm rocking to that. And that's why I pick up a guitar. But also on a Cher album, like that was a kick-ass guitar solo. Who was that? So now I've got that, and I can't make that sound happen with my practice amp. Or my uncle's twin doesn't quite make that stereo big bolt. Like, how is that happening? So that's fascinating. And I remember I'm still discovering the 60s, 70s, and 80s as grunge hits. So I almost skipped it because it was like, I got this whole catalog of music that I'm still trying to get through. I don't have time for whatever's new. And it was funny is when I clued back in was about 96, 97-ish. And I took my ears off the past and I thought, well, who else is out there that's a band? And it was funny is you guys were that first one where I heard that vein again. It was like, there's something happening here. it had like this, I told you, like between Radio Tokyo or anything else, like this mix of, I could hear the hard rock influence, I could hear this Queen influence, I could hear this kind of like Beatles-esque harmony influence, I could hear all these, there was all these things, and I'm like, oh, it makes sense. And so there was a run of bands there that I really connected with. And I say this because it's funny. When I go back, it's like I ask all these guys, well, what were your influences? And they were the same as mine. We may have been like 8 years apart, but it was like they were either in LA in the 1980s and they grew up loving Kiss and Jimmy and Skynyrd, and there was this Southern rock thing. And anyway, it was all this stuff. And I now getting past 40 years old, it's like I look back now and I go, you know what? I get it. All these things were kind of the, what's the word? But like the vein, and I see why it took me forever to realize. I see why there's certain music that I really liked, and it was because they weren't the same music, they weren't the same genre by any means, but we all kind of were playing with this same foundation. Sorry, that's a long-winded thing, but
no, it's great.
I wanted to say that, like, you know, there was stuff that was happening, and like anything, it can get homogenized, and you know, the record companies find a formula, and yes, we get 9 billion of them, but there was something happening there where it's like there was still guitar solos, and there was still this really cool harmony, and I felt like it was a rock opera sometimes, you know, with what you were doing, and I don't know, I just,
that's cool.
You guys really did something where it was like, because there was a lot of people that like are like me that were like, yeah, I'm 14, 15, 16. We're just on the back end of hair metal. Grunge is there, but it's like it was almost over when it started, you know, by the time it made its way to us in Dallas, and it was like, And then there was that. And I remember The Edge in Dallas was the first one to kind of start playing those. And it was like my bridge. It was like my bridge between Eddie Van Halen, Danger, and I skipped an era. And, oh, there's the Marvelous Three. And these guys are putting on a rock show again. And it didn't feel, I felt like I was going to go have a good time at a show. I didn't feel like I was going to say how much I hated my parents for 3 hours. So, you know what I mean? It was like I don't know. It was a bridge. So I just wanted to say, I don't know if you ever hear that, but like that was such a cool connection for me.
No, that's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. And, yeah, and to your question you were asking a minute ago, like it was, when I got into producing other people by accident, I'd already done those demos, like I said, for like Seven Dust and people like that. But the Radio Star was this band that just got signed, and they needed a single. They had just made their debut album. They put a bunch of money behind them. RCA did. What's his name did the record? Same guy who did Color in the Shape. Anyway, British guy. But like that, he did the record and they didn't have a single. And so the manager was like, hey, can you help this band write a Freak of the Week? And that was his exact words. And I was like, I guess. So the singer sent me this chorus, which had a great melody. And then next thing you know, we get together, we write it, and then it becomes, they had to change their name when they got signed as well. So they changed it to SR71. And the song Right Now is what it was. And it became a bigger alternative radio hit than Freak of the Week did. Like it was a little little bit bigger. And I had co-written it. So there was this thing. It wasn't the producing because I was going to produce it, but the A&R guy wanted to produce it. So the A&R guy produced it. Which is fine. It sounded like the demo. It sounded like exactly like what we had worked up when we did it.
Sure.
But yeah, it was kind of funny, that kind of happened. And then all of a sudden I'm getting calls to write or produce for other people all the time. And that I certainly did not have that on my bingo card in 1998, 99 at all.
Man.
But it was like, you know what? This is great because I can exercise all of my favorite musical, indulgences and influences that I loved growing up and it can be for anybody. It doesn't have to be just for my own music, because everybody wants you to do the same thing over and over as an artist, and no one wants you to like experiment and try different things. And it's like, but I grew up on everything. So
same. Right.
So I've enjoyed being able to like tap that well and tap into making records that have all these moments on them that kind of throw back to the music from my youth,
Yeah. I look at like who you've produced, and it's not, I don't want to make this be about, let's do some name dropping, but I do think what I think is even cooler is, I love seeing what you've been able to share over the years, on social and everything else, but the relationships you've built, with people like Pink. And I want to get to the guitar story, because I think that's one of my favorite stories of all time. Just because as a guitarist that truly I will be 80 and I will still be obsessed with this instrument. I just think it is, I started on piano when I was 4, and that's still how I see theory, but the guitar to me is still that thing that was like the same way you like see it in the store and you have the Wayne's World moment. Like that to me was seeing a Strat for the first time. And so, but I think what's cool is whether it's, Billy Joel Armstrong or Pink or anybody that you've done, the relationships you've built with producing, I think is absolutely just as cool when I hear just the impact that you've had on people. When you look at your producing career, is it, like you said, you didn't have that on a bingo card in 1999. In 2024, we're about to be in 2025. When you look back on what you've done, what does Butch Walker think about not just the producing, not just Marvelous 3, not just SouthGang, not just like, how do you look at it all?
Well, I look at it as I'm very fortunate to have made some great relationships and great friends. Producing comes and goes. A moment for a producer comes and goes. It's a very, trend-based, business and job. And so you're lucky to have your moment at all, let alone it lasts 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever. And I'm still making records after 20 something years. I'm very grateful for that. But I think most importantly, like, it doesn't matter if I never make another record with someone like Alicia Pink, what matters is that we became fucking good friends. Like, really, we became great friends. Do vacations, hang, have fun, confide in our deepest, darkest shit with each other, and make that something that's what matters. That's what matters to me at the end of the day, Like, it's not, I don't like using, something as collateral for my job, I don't like using, or vice versa. I don't like going like, oh, well, I got to be friends with this person so they'll continue working with me.
Right.
We call those benefriends, I don't need to be a friend, I don't need beneficial friends. I've had plenty of famous friends that might not have turned out to be the most quality humans in the world. And then I'm lucky that I've made friends with some of those that are the most quality humans in the world. And to say I worked with them on a professional level at any point is icing on the cake and fine and fun, but it way more matters that I can pick up the phone and call this person and talk about life and kids and problems and, struggles and things like that, and be there for them when they need somebody to lean on. So that's big to me. That's a big part of the job is it's just, you end up working with a stranger and leave with a friend,
Yeah. I was going to ask, and I don't want to forget the chronological part, because there's a huge big thing in here that I'm a massive fan of. And that is your solo career, obviously. So you did SouthGang, you did Marvelous 3, and all of a sudden, Ready, Sex, Go is still one of my favorite albums that has ever existed. And
Nice.
My wife doesn't know I'm going to say this. I'm going to embarrass her, but she loves to mention to me that Cold as Hell is her favorite song of all time from Marvelous 3. You walk me through this. Can you explain this? Like, I know that what you guys knew, and you can walk me through how this went. I may be misremembering when you've said this on an interview. You guys were in a sticky situation with the record label. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that ties into finally getting the masters some 2 decades later and being able to have some control. But you guys essentially had to make Ready, Sex, Go your last album, and you guys had to break up in order to get out of that deal. Is that how that went? And then
Correct.
I've heard you almost say that your first solo album could have been the third Marvelous 3 album in some ways. And
Correct.
if you could walk me through going from Marvelous 3 to Butch Walker's doing a solo career, I just want to hear that story because I think that's an interesting fork in the road.
Well, it was the end of the road for Marvelous 3. We had some personal problems. We all needed to like take some time away from each other. We had never been away from each other for 15 years, ever really. And the label was, again, we were getting to that point with the label where we were seeing the writing on the wall that they no longer cared. And we didn't want to do it anymore. And they also didn't really want to drop us. So I think they were afraid that if we went on somewhere and signed with somebody else, and they'd have egg on their face if we ended up having a hit somewhere else. So they refused to let us out of our contract. And so we just said, okay, fine, well, we're breaking up. Good luck keeping us individually. So we just like, we're fuck you. So we broke up. They couldn't hold us individually. Same with our manager. She managed the Marvelous 3, not us individually. So I just left everything. Left the label, left management, the band. The band obviously parted on good terms. It was very bittersweet, but we had to do it. And I immediately was like, I have so much I want to do. I have so much I want to say. I have so much I want to do. And so I immediately got picked up by Arista Records and went in and was already making a solo album.
Wow.
And so I made a solo album, but again, I think I was still pretty scared. I was afraid of losing the fan base we had cultivated with Marvelous 3 based on the kind of music that it was. Because we were a great fucking live band. And we were...
Still are.
Thank you. And we always had a great following because of it. It had nothing to do with radio. Sure, you lost the tons of casual music listeners that would only come to your show because you had a song on the radio at the time and it was the trendy place to be was at that show. But after we lost all those, what was left was a diehard audience of people that loved us for our live show and for who we were. So I was like, well, we're not going to continue as the Marvelous 3. So I put a new band together, and that was my first time getting to play with new people since I was a teenager.
Yeah, right.
And it was absolutely wonderful, and not a disrespect, because playing with Jace and Slug was amazing, and they were incredible musicians. But it was great because everybody needed a break from each other, and I was like, I'm just going to go start this thing with my new my friend on drums and my friend on bass and my friend on guitar, and I'll play guitar and sing, and so I did a record, and it was pretty, I think, written off largely. It was not like nobody cared about it. Also, again, we were faced with a shift of times, and I don't think it was very fashionable because it didn't sound like the Strokes and the Hives and all these bands that were coming out that like had this, that there was a whole new thing. Mm-hmm. And I was more clinging on to the past and clinging on to what Marvelous 3 had developed, in fear of losing the audience and going back to playing literally to 100 people in a bar again. That scared me. I didn't want to do that. But I ended up doing that anyway, because after that imploded. I never did another record for Arista. Kind of left the label. Wasn't pretty. Again, was just kind of I'm going to go away. But what I did notice was that was the time I wanted to take a long break, for my first real long break from the road and from putting out records and from touring. So what ultimately ended up being like a 2-year hiatus, a 2-year break from doing anything, which was a lifetime to me at the time. That's when I literally came into my own as a producer. That's when shit really started happening. That's when I got asked to work with Avril Lavigne. That's when I got asked to work with Simple Plan. I got asked to work with, Katy Perry. I got asked to work with all these people. It all started happening. Like in that 2-year window, I was a nobody as far as producers go, because I didn't even have that SR-71 credit under my belt, because I was just the writer on it, because I didn't get to produce it. And it was the dudes in like Simple Plan that were telling Avril, because they were Canadian and on tour together, that oh, you should work on your second record with this guy Butch Walker. And she was like, oh, who's that? And it was like, and she took a chance, and I had my first number one hit single that I co-wrote and produced with her, and a top 5 before that with her that I also produced, and then it was just game on. And then from that point forward, I finally was at a position where financially, work-wise, there was some stability, and I could literally assess my artist career as all artists, not a transactional thing. That's when I feel like I got better immediately as an artist, because I made what a lot of people that follow me consider to be the best record of my career, which was this record called Letters.
Yep.
And I made that in like 2003. And that was when I was like riding this new wave of being a successful producer and co-writer and really doing it. Like Rolling Stone had just named me producer of the year and all this crazy shit. And I was like, well, what am I as an artist now? And I was like, oh, I think I'm just going to be whatever the fuck I want to be as an artist. And so I said, well, what I really want to do is be a singer-songwriter, and I want people to take my songs seriously, and I don't want to have to dress it up with a bunch of bells and whistles to do it. So I made this very like kind of almost like tame, downplayed record that was a lot of acoustic instruments and a lot of ballads and but I think some of the best songwriting I'd ever done to date, and still to this day are the songs that a lot of people want to hear the most live. So again, it's that connection, and I don't even know how to explain it, because what is it they always say? You can usually trace somebody's musical journey between Beatles or Stones, and and then usually it goes. And I always say that's kind of true, but at the same time, it's like there's always notes of everything that you like, and your albums fall in a category where it's like it actually helped me branch out, because I was like, well, I trust Butch, because usually, even if it's completely different than the previous one, I'll stay with it, because we're and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that led me to finding this band, and that led me to find, whatever this band. And so whether it was Sycamore Meadows or Afraid of Ghosts, or, it was like, I love it because it was just like, what? I think I'm going to do this now. And I think I'm going to do that now. And I think I'm going to do this now. And I think that's what makes it so remarkable. And even even the latest stuff, from Marvelous 3, or what you put together, American Love Story, like during the releasing that during COVID, it was like, I just like that
it's the same way like I told Mark Diglio of XYZ. I go, I've tracked now all of your solos and you never repeated yourself once. I don't think I've ever seen a guitarist do that. And that's the way I feel about Butch Walker records. It's like, you've done all these records. I don't think you ever repeated yourself. And so I think what's neat is that you were doing all this stuff simultaneously, but yet you just kept reinventing and reinventing and reinventing. And it's been fun to watch. I mean, just as a fan of music and a fan of you, obviously, but
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been really a lot of fun to just see what you do next, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's annoying to a lot of fans, but like I
was there. I guess I was there in my 20s, but I guess now you get older and you're like, I don't know. I think it's kick-ass cool to see, I don't know, be shocked by something in a way.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, my heroes, like they didn't make the same record twice. So,
right.
You know,
right.
Whether it be the Beatles, the Stones, Queen, the David fucking Bowie.
Yep.
You know, even like in later times, like Beck and the Beastie Boys, and
yep.
You know, I just loved when a band or when an artist would like Prince. You know, they yes. didn't make the same record twice.
Yep.
They didn't want to. You know, and to me that was just pure artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
yeah.
I respect the Ramones and AC/DC as much as the next person, and I love it. But I would gouge myself in the face with a pencil if I had to just figure out a different way to do G, A, and D, you know, yes. Because they do. Thank God they can do it and do it so fucking good
yep.
and do it better than anybody and look the same, sound the same song titles basically over and over again, the same
yeah.
formula. It's so great. That's not me. It's
sure.
not me. And
sure.
and I also have never been as big as those artists, so I don't really know if that's. I think being at this mid-level where you're not a household name, it just affords you the luxury of reinventing yourself every time you make a record, though. So sure. I think I've been in a very blessed position of being able to do whatever I want on records because I don't really have anything to lose.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Like it's the only thing I would have to lose is my own faith in myself or my own love for my music by phoning something in to make someone else happy
sure.
or doing the same thing over and over again just to make other people happy.
Right.
I think I'd hate myself,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like at least I can still kind of like what I'm doing and like who I am by doing what I'm doing.
You've been now in the music industry in the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, 2010s, and here we are in 2024. You're producing, you've been writing music, you've been playing music, and you played all different genres. What's the music industry look like to Butch Walker today? Because we were just talking about it. From my perspective, we always talk about it repeating itself. Obviously, I hear a ton of stuff in some of the newer artists, even Taylor Swift's new stuff, Chappell Roan. There's a lot of notes of the 80s synths and stuff like that. And I'm starting to see guitar solos, you know, creep back into the picture again with a lot of chorus and pitch shifting. And it's, again, I'm getting it from my channel because that's a lot of the stuff that I cover and I'm hearing younger kids be influenced by it. But broader than that, where does Butch Walker look at kids picking up instruments now? What does it kind of look like? I think I'm always fascinated by those that are in it, so to speak. Like, what do you see?
Well, it's all recycled and it's all cyclical, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about earlier, it's really cool that a young kid that was too young to even know what emo was, let alone hair metal, can all of a sudden there's this cool subgenre of kids playing shred metal and like glam metal and stuff. It's like it's really fun. Yeah. But you know, I don't know that there's a popular masses out there for that.
Right.
So let it live in the spirit of being just punk rock. It's punk rock at this point because Jesus Christ, that's not popular at all.
Anything that's not popular is punk rock.
Punk rock, basically. So I give a lot of props to kids for like, you know, going that path.
Sure.
When they could easily just put on a Supreme shirt and sneakers and do rap or hip hop or Justin Bieber or Post Malone or, like pop music, they could do that because it's exactly what it is. It's popular and it's way more widely accepting of that music, it's the general public is. So what I see is a wide open playing field. What I see is like there's no reason you don't have to. Obviously, it's old news to think you don't have to have a label or a goofy A&R guy in a tracksuit, coming to see your band to get signed. You make your own fate. You put your own music out there, and if you can make people believe it, and if you can make the kids believe it, then you control your destiny. You control your success.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing. I wish I would have come up in that era. Even though it's saturated.
I guess I was going to say the only downside now you think is just obviously you're not getting how do I put it? You're not getting a 3-record deal anymore, and you're not getting
but a lot of that was like a lot of that sounded good on paper and did not pan out to be like good real money for an artist.
And even like the Spotify stuff and everything that's happened there versus getting paid for albums sold, you've been in both worlds now.
I'm in both worlds. I actually, I get paid pretty well for stuff I've produced and written that gets big streams on Spotify and stuff. Now, do I think that the model is flawed? Yes. I mean, just like anybody else, I'm not going to simp for the platforms that are still with these archaic splits for artists, it sucks. But it is also, I've also been, I've heard one too many times and kind of agree with that. We also, because of this, we live in a time where there's 50 million more artists out there. Sure. So the pie is getting cut.
Very small.
Very small. So like, I mean, the fact that it used to be like, let's just make up a number that there was 100 releases a year back in the day, 200 releases a year. There's fucking 20,000.
Sure.
It's unlimited. Sure. If you have an account online and the internet, you can put your music out. Yep. And so there's millions of artists. It's unlimited. It's only limited to who's not making music,
Sure.
So that being said, the future of music is wide open. The future of making money in music is questionable. So and I think that there's work to be done.
Hey everybody, I just want to pause the interview real quick to let you know that this interview was conducted with Butch in December of 2024, so just a few weeks before the most recent fires in Los Angeles. Obviously, you'll notice we're not going to mention these most recent fires, and I just wanted to let everybody know why. My thoughts and prayers go out to everybody in Los Angeles, and with Butch having so many ties and relationships and family and friends out there, I'm fairly certain that he would want me to do the same. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that before Butch talks about his experience with the fire in 2007 when he lost his home in Malibu. So I'll let Butch take it from here. Thanks.
Yeah, it was Thanksgiving weekend of 2007, and my family and I were in New York City. I had a show in Hoboken. I was just playing an acoustic show. And we went for a weekend to enjoy the city. Thanksgiving weekend, we were going to meet up with some relatives and hang. And I played 2 nights in Hoboken at Maxwell's. And they were acoustic gigs, so I just flew with 2 acoustic guitars. And, we had just moved to Malibu, and I just moved my entire recording studio from Atlanta, which was a pretty big commercial facility building with a semi worth of gear that I had, this is stuff I had acquired my whole life and collected my whole life. And since finally being able to afford to buy some things after having success I went nuts, and I bought like tons of guitars and microphones, and really made my studio, like invested into my studio really, and all of the gear. And so that was all set up at this house in Malibu that had a separate recording studio connected to it. And it was Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers' old house. And he was renting it to me, and we were going to end up buying it. So, because it was for sale as well. So after being there for like 9 months, it was like we had fallen in love with that and the area, and it was up in the canyon a little bit from the PCH, and that was our first year out there. So we really started realizing these things called the Santa Ana winds were no joke, and that was these heavy winds that blow up to like 80, 90 miles an hour, and they blow any direction, not just one direction, and they usually come from the sea. And and it's really bad for fires.
Yeah.
So, and because there's so many idiots in the world, that there's too much room for human error when there's winds like that. All it takes is one spark from one stupid thing, a campfire, a cigarette, anything. And it's so dry, there's no rain ever out there. And it was dry, it was a drought. So while in New York playing the shows, getting a call, getting calls at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
In Malibu.
Right.
That the entire hillside's on fire and Malibu's on fire and yada yada, and like people are like, oh shit, you need to get out of there. And I was like, well, we're not there, we're in New York. And so people are keeping an eye out, and I'm getting a lot of updates. And the thing that we weren't really prepared for was the fact that, well, you take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of false flags that happen with these winds and the fires. They can change direction and go the other way, and then you're fine.
Right.
And then they'll contain it and it'll get put out. This is just, that was happening out there a lot. So for some reason I had this like kind of false sense of like confidence that it's gonna be all right. It'll change directions. We'll be okay. It's fine. But there was a friend watching the dogs at the house. And so by the time it was like, I don't know, maybe 6 a.m. LA time, I was on the phone with my friend at the house there, and they said that the fire was like right in the backyard. It was coming down the mountain. And I was like, okay, shit. So they loaded up the dogs, took my car, left everything else there, because I was like, the dogs wouldn't fit in this person's tiny little car. And I said, hey, just in case something happens, do me a favor and go into the studio and grab the hard drive sitting on top of my computer. Just unplug it and bring it. It literally was like everything I'd been working on record-wise up to that point that year that was unfinished records for Pink and people like that.
Wow.
So they grabbed the hard drive and the dogs and left, and my other friend Ryan, who was a guy I used to like, I rode motorcycles with out there and everything. He was good, really good human. He called me and he's like, what can I do if something were to happen? I was like, well, our guy that left, our friend with the dogs, he's gone already. I was like, dude, would you mind going back to the house and just grabbing like some guitars off the wall and grabbing some mics, and more importantly, grab like, the burial flags and the war medals and these things that were personal photographs of our like some of like deceased family members and like war vets and in the family and things like that. And so he he went, and when I was getting coffee with my son in a stroller. He was 6 months old, and in New York City that morning, just kind of like keeping my eye on the news. And Ryan called me back, and he was like coughing and out of breath, and he was like, man, I'm so sorry. I tried to get close, but I couldn't get close. The smoke was too much, and the fire, and the cops had your street blocked off and barricaded, and I blew through the barricade. And I was like, Jesus Christ, what's going on? And so he was like, I went up to the house with the truck. I couldn't even get up the driveway. He said, I'm so sorry. And I was like, why are you sorry? What are you sorry? He was like, man, your house is gone. It's just gone. He's like, I'm sitting here looking, and there's nothing left of it. And I was just like, I just kind of broke down. Like I was so shocked. And so I just broke down and started crying. And I had to go back and wake up my wife and tell her. And it was just brutal. 'Cause we had just moved our entire life into this house, like literally 6 months prior. And it was so devastating that I can't even I don't even know what to feel about it. All I know is I had a lot of time to process, I lost like about 50 guitars, most of them vintage. About 50 vintage mics I had been collecting, amps, vintage drum kits, everything. So it was pretty wild, and all of my there was a vault downstairs that Flea had a concrete vault, and that was my tape locker. I had all the reel-to-reels and hard drives of everything I'd ever done in my entire life in there, burned completely out to the ground. Wow. Just like, just reels, spindles, and mechanical parts and shells and carcasses of metal structures. You couldn't even make out what things were. So it was wild. So that happening, just took a long time to process, but we processed it and realized that it was not worth crying over. That it was what mattered most was the outpouring of love and support of people that came to us and offered anything and everything. And it made me really start to realize that, how I didn't have any room to complain. It's like there's homeless people with no families and no one that loves them. And we had all these people that loved us and coming to our aid. We still had some money in the bank. So it's not like we were living in a box on the street like some people were, which is why I get very offended when people complain about homeless people and act like it's their fault. A lot of this has never been their fault,
100%.
It's mental health struggles, and a lot of them have nothing, and they have no families and no one to turn to. And it's just brutal and sad, and it infuriates me when people are insensitive about that. So I just was like, I don't know. I was welled up with joy and happiness after that, because I felt like there was so much I felt rich from support and from love, and not like gear poor. I didn't feel like guitar poor. And then of course, like I said, I had heroes like Brendan O'Brien, and he was a producer hero of mine all through the 90s. I mean, I wanted to be him. That's the guy I wanted to be. I had people like Brendan O'Brien and Michael Beinhorn and these legends and Jack Joseph Puig and all these people that I knew that were reaching out going, man, I can't imagine what you're going through. If I lost all my stuff, I don't know what I would do. Here's the keys to my storage. Take anything, take everything, whatever you want, as long as you want it. Take guitars, take amps, take drums, take mics. And it was just like,
wow.
That part makes me want to cry more than anything.
Sure.
Not the losing the stuff.
Sure.
But the thing that makes me want to, and does make me cry, is the people that show humanity during things like that. And the fact that I felt I felt loved, and cared for, and we felt loved, and our kid had clothing companies giving him clothes and us clothes and all this. It was just like, man, I don't deserve that. I felt like I didn't deserve all that. I felt like I know a lot of other people that need this more than I do. And of course I ended up giving a lot of that stuff to people that needed it, because
you're right. Yeah.
I literally wore the same jeans I came home from New York in for a year straight. Yeah. My wife was like, you got to take those off. But I was like, I didn't have any. I came home with a suitcase and a change of clothes and 2 acoustic guitars to my name. And that was it.
Wow.
And I was in the middle of trying to make a new record, which was Sycamore Meadows. And I couldn't even, I had writer's block. I couldn't write anything. And then the fire happened and I lost everything. And then I just couldn't stop writing. And then I wrote everything I had a laptop and 2 acoustic guitars, and I finished the record. And my friend Alicia that you mentioned earlier, Pink, showed up at my door with a brand new custom shop VOS Les Paul standard G0 model tobacco sunburst, just like Ace Frehley played in 1976 on the Destroyer album and tour. And I was just like, and that was literally my first electric guitar again. That I had no electric guitars. She showed up at the ruins of our house the next day. Like, she went there to see if she could like salvage anything when we were stuck in New York. That's what I mean by the friendships that matter more than the professional relationships matter, because that is a real friend.
But no kidding. But the symmetry to being that guitar, did she know?
No, I don't know. She had no. I don't think she had any idea, because
amazing.
Yeah, she asked her guitar player Justin, who is awesome and a friend of mine. She said, "Would you go?" She didn't know anything about guitars, so she's like, "Will you go pick out the best fucking guitar you can think of for Butch?" And that's exactly what he did.
Wow, God, that is just
yeah. And so that was a really cool moment and so important, because it's like I never realized how important those tools were to me until they were gone. And I was like, fuck, I got to go out and buy another guitar. I don't even have an electric guitar.
Right.
So, but yeah, no, that was a beautiful turning point in life. Realization.
And your guitar, the silver, red, and blue one, ended up being hanging up in a restaurant of one of your friends.
Yeah, so when that fire happened, it was already hanging up. I had already retired that after Marvelous 3 broke up, and gave it to my friend Jeremy from the band Lit, who put up at his rock and roll bar that was like a memorabilia kind of a rock cafe bar in California. And so that had been mounted on the wall for years. Unbelievable. And when we talked about Marvelous 3 getting back together for the first time in 20-something years, he fucking pulled that thing off the wall and got it all restored for me and made back good as new, and came over and brought it to my studio. And I was like, yeah, there it is. They find a way back.
Well, I just say
just like that Strat found its way back to me, which was my first ever Strat I ever got when I was 16 years old. I bought that guitar for $400, and it was my first Strat that I ever had. And Jay Svencher texted me a photo of it one day last year, and I was like, what the fuck is that? I was like, that looks like my first Strat. And he goes, it is your first Strat. He said, do you remember who you sold it to? And I was like, he had to refresh my memory. He's like, yeah, you traded that for a Marshall to my old guitar player in Tickled Pink. And I said, oh my God, I've got to have it back. Do you think he'll sell it back to me? And I called Rick, the guy who was his old guitar player down in Florida. And he goes, absolutely, man. He's like, let's work a trade or something. So I traded him a guitar for it.
Wow.
And got it back. And that's my first Strat that I ever had in 1987.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is cool. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Cool. They find their way back.
They do.
And that guitar, the 62 Hummingbird on the wall, that guitar is literally the longest I've ever had any guitar. That's the oldest possession I have, because I had that long before the fire, and I've written everything and every hit song or anything I've ever worked on that guitar, and that was the only guitar that survived the fire because it was in the shop getting crack repairs.
Oh,
and so
gosh,
I promised myself, and I had toured with that guitar all over the world and dropped it a million times, and the cracks all over it from it. I took it in to get it repaired, and it was in repair for like a month when I went to New York to play those acoustic gigs. And when I came back from, and I had nothing when I came back, I was like, I went to the luthier. I was like, give me that fucking guitar back.
Right now.
I need that guitar back right now. And I just held it. And I've never parted ways with it since. It's just like always been there.
I was going to ask, do you have a favorite one today? Like the one that you're like,
that's it right there. That guitar,
yeah.
I cut my teeth on that guitar. I played all over the world with that thing. I mean, and I've written every song that ever was anything to me on that guitar. And I bought it for $800 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It had a dove tailpiece on it. And even cooler was a year ago or so when my buddy Cesar that runs Gibson now.
Oh yeah.
He said, "Hey, can we take that guitar and have my master luthier restore it and like really professionally repair all the cracks and everything and make it like, you know, really great again?" Because the problem is I wasn't using it on records because it had lost all of its body because it had so many cracks in it from me abusing it. Because it was a beater when I bought it. Like I said, it had a dovetail piece on it. The pick guard was off of it when I got it. It was $800. I didn't think anything about it, but it was such a great guitar to me that there was lots of songs in it. So I gave it to Cesar. That dude had it for 3 months, completely disassembled on the bench, and completely put it all back together. And it plays and sounds amazing now. And they didn't change anything cosmetically about it. Still got my Converse shoestring strap string on it that from when I gave it to him. Matter of fact, the Dove bridge on it that was pulling up from the body because I used to break the strings off of it and it was destroyed. They hand carved a whole brand new Dove replacement bridge for it. Oh my God. So that's a whole brand new bridge on it. That is replaced with on a hummingbird, you know, and so I put it on. I showed that on my socials and told the story about it, and this kid reached out to me, and this is the kicker of all kickers. This kid reached out to me and said, "Hey, did you get that guitar in Spartanburg, South Carolina?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he goes, "Well," he said, "the cool thing," and I might be saying this wrong, but he said that guitar belonged to, that was my great uncle's guitar, or something like that. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. And I was like, who was your great uncle? He said Toy Caldwell from the Marshall Tucker Band.
Oh my God. So
that guitar was Toy Caldwell's, the main songwriter and guitar player for the Marshall Tucker Band. And I didn't know that until like last year. After all it's been through.
Butch.
Because he said, he pawned off, sadly, all of his shit in Spartanburg years before he passed away. And he said, I recognize, he sent me a picture of it and it had the dovetail piece on it and everything with like his grandpa playing it.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, this is insane.
That is insane. Can I also, this is not a plug for anything, but we were talking about Les Pauls earlier. One of the things is I was building my own, you know, kind of business with building guitars and trying to put them in more working musicians' hands and stuff. And
they're great.
Thank you, by the way. I just knowing that you enjoy it it means the world to me.
I love my tellies.
When I did it, I had to sell a Les Paul, but it was one of the first Les Pauls I bought when Cesar joined Gibson. So that new run of the standard 60s and the 50s. And it reminded me of I've never played a 59 Burst, but I have played some really good Les Pauls. And I remember the reason I'm going to buy another one is I sold one of those. And I just remember sitting there picking up those guitars and going, God, this is exactly like... For 20 cents, like I still couldn't believe the price tag to pick up a Les Paul standard and go, this feels exactly what it, at times it wasn't that I couldn't find one in 2003 or 1999. It was just, it was like, oh, this one's, it's close. It's just not. And then I picked those up, and I picked another one up, and I picked another one up. And ever since he's been there, I've just been, sorry, this is a guitar geek coming out. I'm like, man, this feels like Gibson to me. Like it feels...
they're making great shit again.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I've got like a I know you've probably seen my blue Carina Wood Explorer.
Oh, dude.
It's a Murphy Labs custom shop, and it's probably one of the best guitars I've ever played and had in my life. And it's literally a reissue Carina Wood spray over Pelham Blue Explorer, and it's so sick.
I can't thank you enough.
It was great to talk.
I feel like we could do 50,000 more of these, but Butch, thank you so much. Thanks for continuing to inspire me, man, every single day.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that, man.
Yeah, and keep in touch, and I'll be there on the next tour, and I'll let you know when I'm out in Nashville.
I will. Please come when you come into town. We'll hang.